Uganda, Zimbabwe. We say good morning to our friends in the Central African sub-region, Chad, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, wherever you are, in East Africa and West Africa. Thank you for joining us on this 8th think tank on digital transformation, organized by the African Capacity Building Foundation, the ACBF. Is it possible that we have our group photograph at this time? Vincent Dopola Tangana, est-ce que tu m'entends?
Merci Drusilla. Donc, poursuivre ces travaux après cette photo de famille pour immortaliser cet instant. Mesdames, Messieurs, je rappelle que nous sommes rassemblés dans cette plateforme dans le cadre de la 8e session du sommet des think tanks d'Afrique 2021. Nous allons à présent lancer la première session des échanges. Le thème général retenu pour cette session est comprendre la transformation numérique, état, implications et potentiel pour reconstruire l'Afrique en mieux. Le modérateur de cette première session n'est autre que le professeur Emmanuel Nadosier, c'est le secrétaire exécutif ACBF. Merci, professeur, de prendre la parole. Merci aussi de bien vouloir nous présenter les membres de votre panel à l'ensemble des participants.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur, pour cette introduction. Bon, je vais justement directement à cette session. This is the session that focuses on understanding digital transformation by looking at the state, the implications, and the potential for building back Africa better. The objective is really to discuss and share, views and evidence on the state of digital transformation in Africa, and also to thoroughly examine its implications, as well as the potential for building Africa back better. The rationale for this session is really to dig deep into the aspects of digital transformation and have a clear understanding of where Africa is, where it should be, and what it takes to bridge the gap between the two scenarios. We have in this panel experts with exceptional understanding of the subject matter. And I believe we have those who can provide exciting ideas and experiences to share with us today. I do not want to preempt some of the discussions that these distinguished panelists will share with us. And I also do not want to start giving you a very lengthy context or introduction, because I don't believe that that would help us in delving into the real subject matter of the issue. But as we proceed in this panel, I think that we may have to not only examine the state, but also look at opportunities and potentialities for the acceleration of the digitalization in Africa, especially in light of the COVID-19, the impact of that in the economies. And I also try to assess how the pandemic has affected the implementation of digital transformation, including national strategies. And of course, since we have a mixture of distinguished people from various sectors of the economy, they will expect to have experiences shared on the efforts being made and the various initiatives in place from all these sectors of the society. we need to consider certain things in this particular first panel. There's a need for us to try to capture a range of contributions and ideas and perspectives from the panelists, which means that given the time limitation, that they need to go straight to the point and share with us their knowledge that they have and their wisdom, so that we can benefit from that. And also, as your moderator, we need to manage time in the discussion to ensure that participants are able to contribute and also to ask questions. So that interaction for us will be essential. Finally, we need to also try to strictly adhere to the time allocated to each speaker. So I'm generally a nice guy, but when it comes to time management, something happens to me and I tend to change a little bit. So each panelist will be given maximum of 8 minutes. And I know there's a whole lot you can say, but just for us to get the real gist, I would really appreciate if you stick to the time, and so that other participants who can be given brief moments to intervene. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I've got speakers here. This distinguished, starting with Dr. Anthony Coleman, the principal research economist and senior manager at the Afrexim Bank, whose partnership we cherish very, very much. I also have the Professor Alban Aoure, the director of the CAPEC en Côte d'Ivoire. And I also have Mr. Tunde Fafouan, advisor to the UN Economic Commission for Africa Digital Center and managing partner of Kisku Incorporated, and Mr. Ibikun Onitiju, head of digital, Nestle Central and West Africa, and Ms. Camila Roca, head of research at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll agree with me that this is really a distinguished panel that is from whom a lot is expected. I see they don't have enough pressure already. But let me begin right away with Dr. Anthony Coleman, whom I've already introduced. Dr. Coleman, Afrexim Bank is known as one of the key Pan-African institutions supporting digital transformation in Africa, especially with the launch of MANSA, the Africa's digital due diligence repository, which we think is an extremely fascinating and important initiative. From where you stand, can you tell us a little bit about how you see digital transformation in Africa? What are the opportunities in light of the impact of COVID-19? You have the floor, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Professor Emmanuel Nadozi. Good morning, fellow panelists and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for Afrexim Bank to be part of this conversation as the continent explores efficient options towards the achievement of its development goals. Indeed, Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, and the aspirations of the AFCFTA can only be achieved if the continent works in a coordinated manner to optimize existing opportunities while at the same time addressing inherent challenges. The topic for this panel session, Understanding Digital Transformation, States Implications and Potential for Building Back Africa, is not only timely, it's very relevant, especially in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, and more immediately as a result of the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. It also aligns with the bank's mandate to facilitate the establishment of requisite digital infrastructure with a view to assisting the continent achieve its potential. There is a growing digital divide. For instance, according to the World Bank World Development Indicators Database 2019, the size of population with access to internet in Africa is less than 50%, which compares unfavorably with East Asia and the Pacific, which is around 65%. Latin America and the Caribbean is about 68%. Europe is about 85%. and North America is about 90%. It is important for us to close this gap. Otherwise, the growing youth of the continent indeed will miss out on the opportunity to live up to their potential and make any meaningful contribution to the economic aspirations of Africa. Digitization and digitalization offer a unique opportunity to interrupt this narrative. As highlighted by Her Excellency, digitalization will significantly contribute to unlocking new opportunities for growth, economic transformation, innovation, job creation, and access to services which can only be possible through the internet or through digitalization. The ongoing ramifications of COVID-19 has, as a matter of fact, increased the urgency of the need for Africa to accelerate technology adoption, especially in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware of the contribution mobile money technology like M-Pesa and other similar platforms are making towards achieving financial inclusion across Africa. However, access to reliable internet service is a nightmare in many countries, while some countries at the moment are currently even struggling to introduce digital IDs. It is in the context of the foregoing that Afreximbank sees its position as a very important one to ensure that requisite digital infrastructure are created or established towards facilitating especially movement of goods and services, and also towards facilitating or easing doing business in the continent, all with a view to contributing towards the continent-wide aspirations of achieving a sustainable growth. The bank currently is piloting the implementation of its Pan-African Payments and Settlement System, PAPS. The PAPS is a digital platform which will enable intra-African trade and commerce payments to be made in African currencies, thereby reducing the persistent challenges posed by the liquidity constraint of having access to hard currency like the euro or the pound sterling or the dollar. For example, the PAPS is going to ensure that I am living in Egypt and I use the Egyptian pound. If I want to buy anything from let's say Harare, where the currency is predominantly, let's say the bond, I'm going to pay through the PAPS the Egyptian pound for whatever service or item I'm buying from Harare. And the seller of the item is going to receive the Zimbabwean bond or the Zimbabwe dollar, as the case may be. It is one way of the bank trying to reduce transaction costs in intra-regional trade and help formalize a significant portion of informal cross-border trade, thus creating the conditions for a sustainable post-COVID-19 recovery. The bank, once again, has created and is implementing its Pan-African Customer Due Diligence Repository platform called MANSA. MANSA is a digital platform for financial institutions, corporate entities, and SMEs. And it was developed to address the perceived risk of doing business in Africa and with Africans. So what it does is to provide a single source of primary data needed to conduct customer due diligence and know your customer checks on counterparties in the continent. Now, what this then helps is to reduce the risk or to facilitate counterparty understand African entities better in order to do business with them. Furthermore, in the bank digital ecosystem, the bank is also currently introduced or implementing its trader intelligence and trader regulations to address key barriers to intra-African trade and lack of comprehensive African trade and investment information. The trader intelligence platform provides a comprehensive market access information on trade and investment opportunities. It facilitates business-to-business matchmaking and to increase intra-regional trade and investment. It supports business transactions between buyers and sellers in and outside Africa. The Trader Regulations Platform, on the other hand, provides a centralized digital source of regulations and legislative requirements for all trade and investment activities across Africa. Why do we have to do this? It is clear that one of the key inhibitions to doing business in Africa and among Africans is lack of information. And so the trader platform, the regulations and the information platforms would help ease the burden of the difficulty in accessing relevant information in order to do business. So for a bank, we are of the view that the only way for Africa to build back and to build forward is for all stakeholders, including policymakers, commercial banks and development finance institutions, the private sector, academics, as well as think tanks, among others, to work in harmony towards an agenda of a continent-wide digitalization to close the digital divide and propel Africa on a sustainable growth trajectory, while at the same time consolidating the development gains that have been made over the past 2 decades. And so for us as a Afrexim Bank, we take our relationship with think tanks and with ACBA very seriously, and we know that it is in this unity and in this partnership that we will be able to achieve the Agenda 2063's aspirations, and we will be able to optimize the gains that are also inherent in the AFCFTA, which has been touted as a game changer. The relationship and the collaboration with think tanks and with all other major stakeholders will help us carry out this message of ensuring that we digitalize in order to put the continent at the level where it should be and to reduce poverty and ensure equality among its citizenry. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Coleman, for, first of all, being succinct and really being to the, time, so I really appreciate that, because we're a bit behind time, which means that everybody needs to be cooperative in this manner. But I particularly note, I'm not going to summarize a lot because of time constraints, but the key points that come out, which is driving the marvelous work done by Afrexim Bank, whether it's in terms of dealing with issues concerning liquidity challenges and currency, issues, multiplicity of currencies and all that, putting on a platform that will enable to reduce these transaction costs and make transactions to become easier to do and to facilitate that. But also thinking in terms of the de-risking business doing in Africa, which is a major problem. Often it's perception of risk, but regardless, we still need to deal with it, which is what Mansa is helping to do through this due diligence and the risking mechanism that is there, and to open opportunities for African businesses, and then to facilitate transactions as well, dealing with information inadequacies as well as digital divide. So I thank you very much for that intervention. I'm sure you will get some more questions if we have time for that. Le professeur Aban Aoulé, qui est le directeur de CAPEC en Côte d'Ivoire. Le gouvernement de la Côte d'Ivoire s'est donné comme ambition d'assurer le développement par l'éthique, de sorte à créer les bases pour le déploiement d'une économie numérique pouvant impacter durablement l'économie, changer en profondeur le fonctionnement de l'économie sociale et créer les fondamentaux pour une économie de savoir au service des populations ivoiriennes. D'après vous, comment est-ce que le Covid a-t-il affecté la mise en œuvre de cette transformation numérique de l'Afrique et quels sont les efforts déployés et les différentes initiatives pour assurer l'utilisation des solutions numériques pour reconstruire des économies africaines? Vous avez la parole, monsieur le professeur.
Merci, monsieur le secrétaire exécutif de l'ACBF. Dans mon intervention en français, je remercie l'ACBF d'avoir bien voulu associer la CAPEC à ce 8e sommet des think tanks. Et donc, par rapport à la problématique de l'économie numérique ou du développement numérique, nous sommes tous d'accord sur un fait, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, il est nécessaire d'investir dans ce développement numérique. La COVID-19 met cela en exergue parce que nous avons vu combien de fois il fallait apprendre maintenant à travailler à distance et la fracture numérique a affecté la productivité de plusieurs entreprises. Celles qui étaient en avance ont pu plus gagner du terrain et les États ont compris donc la nécessité. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est qu'il y a des avancées. En Côte d'Ivoire, par exemple, en termes de statistiques, nous avons un taux de pénétration de la téléphonie mobile qui est très élevé parce que nous sommes à plus de 100% en termes de pénétration. Et nous étions à 143% de taux de pénétration en 2018 et nous sommes aujourd'hui à 152% en 2021. Donc, on voit déjà qu'en 2 années, il y a eu une progression. Et nous avons aussi le taux de pénétration d'Internet qui avance bien, de 65%, nous sommes à 77%. Ça veut dire quoi? Que non seulement il y a une demande, mais il y a aussi une offre d'infrastructures à travers, je dirais, l'écosystème dans lequel se trouve l'État et également les entreprises. Mais on ne peut ignorer les défis qui sont les nôtres. Et je voudrais mettre l'accent sur ces défis et après indiquer ce qui est fait ou ce qui doit être fait pour le temps que j'ai. Donc, les défis qui sont les nôtres, aujourd'hui, nous avons, pour moi, un défi important, c'est l'alphabétisation. Les études montrent bien la relation positive, une corrélation très positive entre alphabétisation et utilisation, intensité d'utilisation des services numériques. Donc, il est important de voir comment régler, parce que nous sommes dans des pays africains avec des taux d'alphabétisation de l'ordre de 50-60%, voilà, comme le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire. Et donc, il faut travailler sur ça parce que c'est l'alphabétisation des adultes, des gens qui ont déjà décroché avec l'école, qui ne savent ni lire ni écrire. Et ça pose quelques problèmes quant à leur capacité à tirer profit de l'avantage numérique qu'offre aujourd'hui, je dirais, l'économie mondiale. Donc, voilà un aspect. Un autre défi, c'est l'électricité. Parce que utiliser le numérique veut dire avoir accès à l'électricité, connecter les éléments, charger même ou recharger son téléphone. Ça, c'est des éléments importants et il faut aller vite quant à l'accès à l'électricité pour nos populations. Mais un autre aussi élément sur lequel les États travaillent ou doivent travailler, c'est la réglementation. Et par exemple, il apparaît que la réglementation entre les États pourrait accroître justement les investissements en infrastructures numériques et certainement doubler même l'accès au haut débit. Parce qu'il y a la question de l'interconnexion qui pose encore des défis de réglementation. Et nous avons également ce développement du commerce en ligne qui est une opportunité en même temps qui pose un défi. Comment réglementer ce commerce en ligne et comment fiscaliser ce commerce en ligne pour que nos pays tirent meilleur profit. Et ça, c'est un débat important. Et en Côte d'Ivoire, il y a les services du ministère du Budget qui travaillent sur cela. Il y a aussi dans nos pays, à l'ère du numérique, nous avons encore un gap en termes de compétences dans le numérique. Et il nous faut investir rapidement là-dedans. Les compétences qui nous permettent de nous couvrir contre la cybercriminalité, qui est par exemple un défi mondial important. Il y a les compétences qui nous permettent aujourd'hui d'aller plus vite en termes de start-up et en termes de création d'offres de services numériques. Donc, investir dans ces compétences-là qui constituent des défis. On a parlé tout à l'heure du poids de l'informel, il y a l'accès à Internet lui-même, il y a le poids de l'informel, il y a la question du financement. Parce que les startups, par exemple, vous diront, nous avons des services numériques pour régler des problèmes dans l'agriculture, des problèmes même du secteur informel, mais nous n'avons pas le financement, l'accompagnement, le système financier nécessaire parce que nous sommes des startups et on nous demande de l'expérience, on nous demande d'avoir des fonds de garantie ou des garanties et ça pose des problèmes et autres. Et nous avons bien sûr la faiblesse de la logistique également. Il faut faire face à la cybercriminalité. Face à tout cela et cette demande forte, il y a la COVID-19 qui s'est vue parce qu'aujourd'hui, les transactions en ligne sont croissantes. Alors, face à cela, l'État de Côte d'Ivoire a continué d'investir dans les applications. Par exemple, nous avons la question du e-government qui est déjà très bien outillé pour l'information stratégique de l'État aux populations. Et nous sommes à l'étape aussi de la digitalisation, je dirais, avancée des services financiers. Déclaration en ligne des impôts, paiement en ligne des impôts, dématérialisation des processus d'accès aux pièces administratives en cours. Et hier même, à une réunion avec le directeur de cabinet adjoint du ministre du Budget, il nous signifiait la mise en ligne bientôt à la fin du premier trimestre 2022 de e-fournisseurs pour les questions des marchés publics. E-fournisseurs pour que tous les fournisseurs de l'État puissent suivre les stades de leur paiement parce que le paiement des marchés publics prend du temps et cela affecte énormément les entreprises. Donc, voilà des efforts qui sont faits et bien sûr que nous devons mettre l'accent sur l'interconnectivité des pays parce que nous sommes à l'heure de la ZLECAF, à l'heure d'une intégration poussée et l'interconnectivité, on parlait tout à l'heure des transactions économiques en différents pays. Donc, comment nous mettons l'accent sur l'interconnectivité pour que ce ne soit pas cloisonné? Voilà pourquoi la réglementation doit nous aider. Voilà, donc ce sont des défis. Il y a des opportunités énormes qui existent aujourd'hui avec tous ces jeunes qui s'intéressent au numérique, avec les besoins, la demande, l'offre, une dynamique et une économie importante. Et une fois que c'est bien encadré, une fois qu'on a les infrastructures nécessaires, l'accompagnement nécessaire, le système financier qui va avec, je pense que nous pourrons déjà rattraper une bonne partie de notre facture numérique en investissant aussi dans le coaching des personnes à faible capacité d'alphabétisation, surtout en milieu rural. Parce que je termine pour dire, mais le numérique, c'est aussi un avantage pour accroître la productivité dans tous les secteurs d'activité et notamment dans le secteur agricole. Vous voyez, l'accès à l'information, l'accès aux semences, les transactions d'agriculteurs, l'accès au marché, les ventes, et tout ça, c'est une dynamique importante et tous les pays devraient travailler là-dessus. En tout cas, nous travaillons avec l'État de Côte d'Ivoire et ce sont des recommandations fortes. Et aujourd'hui, avec la primature, il y a des actions qui sont en cours, surtout pour le secteur agricole. On nous a confié ces travaux-là et nous le faisons. Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif, j'ai épuisé mes 8 minutes, donc je vous remercie et je reste encore disponible. Merci.
Bon, merci beaucoup parce que vous avez, n'est-ce pas, écouté mon appel à le fait que le temps presse. Mais je vous remercie sincèrement pour nous avoir donné vraiment les précisions qui sont très importantes ici, qu'il s'agit non seulement d'élaborer les défis principaux auxquels le pays fait face en ce moment, cette question de numérisation, mais aussi là où les choses semblent marcher, c'est-à-dire les choses qui marchent aussi. Bon, vous avez évoqué quelques défis comme l'alphabétisation, les problèmes d'accès à l'électricité, des questions, des problèmes de réglementation et des défis de développement de commerce en ligne, etc., etc. Mais vous avez dit aussi que au niveau de, n'est-ce pas, de e-government ainsi que les services financiers, qu'il y a des choses qui marchent très bien. Bon, moi, j'espère que, je pense que vous allez avoir pas mal de questions qui viendront tout à l'heure. Mais entre-temps, je passe tout de suite au premier intervenant. And this will be from Mr. Tunde Fafouan, who is the advisor to the UN Economic Commission for Africa's Digital Center and also a managing partner in Kisco Incorporated. So, Mr. Fafouan, it is known that the ECA has embarked on, since 2018, on the digital initiative to support African countries in fully harnessing the opportunities of digital identity to facilitate the provision of legal entity for all Africans and to leverage digital trade in AFCFTA. From where you stand, how do you see these issues in terms of where digital transformation is in Africa and the impact of COVID, as well as how to make sure that strategies are fully exploited? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Nandozier, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. It's a pleasure to be here today and to partake in this panel to address what is a really important question and requirement for action in terms of the development of the continent. Perhaps I would like to just start. I think it's important that we understand and touch upon the environment within the continent that we're working in and that we are looking to digitally transform. So we know that up to 80% of Africans are in the informal sector. So this is one of the challenges, but it is also one of the opportunities. We have a very young population. More than 70% of the population is under 24 years of age, and more than 170 million youth will be joining the ranks of employment or looking for employment over the next 10 years. We also have the start and implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area that joins together 3.4 trillion worth of economy and 1.3 billion people across the continent, which is a challenge, particularly for small businesses, micro businesses, to participate in what is going to be this game changer because of the protocol requirements, because of the administrative requirements, and of course, because many of our businesses are in the informal sector. So against this backdrop, we have made significant gains across the continent in terms of digitization, in terms of e-payments, in terms of mobile that we're all familiar with. But when you dig under the statistics, we also see that unique mobile numbers are probably only 55% in terms of penetration. A lot of people have multiple SIMs, so there's not as many individual mobile phones out there as is sometimes quoted. And in many cases, the head of household will have a mobile phone and others will use it. We also know that the actual internet access or penetration rate is only about 30%. As has also been quoted by other panelists. So we have critical challenges on infrastructure still. Quite honestly, the implementation of the Know Your Customer, eKYC, in some cases digital ID, have also reduced the number of people who have access to SIMs. So from an ECA perspective, infrastructure is still critical. And governments have the opportunity to, in some cases, utilize universal service or access funds to get further infrastructure out to the rural areas. We know that things like data center and cloud computing is heating up. The acquisition of Main One in Nigeria for $320 million is an indication that there's a lot of foreign and global interest in the continent and in digitizing. But there's still a lot that needs to be done across these infrastructure areas of getting fiber out and into the communities and into the rural areas. Fiber is the basis of which high-speed internet and broadband can be delivered. And from that perspective, the ECA works with member states on policies to attract investment, on policies to generate infrastructure. I'd also suggest that government, which still makes up the biggest part of most of the African economies, has a lot more to do. During COVID, we've seen very positive reactions from many governments. Togo, for example, used digital infrastructure to deliver benefits. A number of countries in West Africa used the opportunity to digitize and allow citizens to make payments online. But government is such a key part of the economy that unless and until governments fully adopt e-payments, electronic transactions, and move to e-government across all the sectors, and not just from a strong ICT ministry, but in agriculture, in education, in health. That is the trigger that will then bring in private sector investment that will help to build capacity. The third area that ECA also focuses on is capacity building. Of course, the Africa Capacity Building Foundation is one of those organizations that's leading the way. The need for platforms and collaboration across institutions and research institutions, academic institutions, so critical to build the knowledge, the capacity, the expertise that we need across the continent to address the digital divide, to support primary research in the key areas of artificial intelligence and blockchain and all the other technologies that are coming down the line. Again, ECA's policies and regulation support, and as a convener of countries and policymakers, help to pull together many of the disparate efforts across the continent. I think finally, I'd like to suggest that there is an opportunity to create a whole cadre of digital community workers. So often we see both the private and the public sector and even civil societies trying to deliver services, trying to use digital infrastructure, but there's a gap. And that gap within the communities and the adoption of technologies, the delivery of technologies, could be addressed by digital community workers that are experts in agriculture, in health, and education, and help to connect communities to digital services. So many times we see efforts that are based on a large platform or provider trying to address individuals. But as a society, we work as a community, we live as a community, we exist as a community, and particularly in rural areas, there's an enormous opportunity to have a central expert that is able to support a community level type implementation of these policies and services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother, for this illuminating presentation that is succinct, to the point, and I would say impactful. I would also indicate that just like the previous speakers, and in particular, Professor Alban Ahure, who more or less wanted us to recognize that even though there are challenges, that we probably need to also see what is working and start from there and build from there, which is the way development should be happening. Not always thinking that everything is impossible. But you have provided us with a very critical point about seeing not just the context in which this digitalization is happening in Africa, but also the approach that could be very, that have profound impact, i.e. what you call the digital community workers, and looking at this from the community standpoint. And I think that's an element that I believe strongly we would have to find a way to take as we move forward during this session and beyond. With that, let me immediately call upon Mr. Ibiku Onitiju, who is from Nestle, the head of digital in Central and West Africa. Mr. Onitiju, Nestle's 2020 annual report highlighted that the company's continental digital transformation enabled it to accelerate growth and better engage with consumers. This has really translated into Nestle's e-commerce sales growth by 48.4% in 2020. So from your standpoint, especially, and someone who is operating on the other side of, being in the private sector, how do you see this scenario, whether it's in terms of the opportunities and potentialities that the acceleration of digitalization in Africa will present, but also where we see within the context, what we see in the context of the pandemic? Mr. Onitiju, do you have the floor, please?
Thank you so much, Professor Nnadozie, and I would like to just acknowledge also my fellow panelists and the great work to have these discussions in really exploring, how to continue to drive digital adoption, digitalization in Africa. To your question about the growth that we have seen at Nestle in e-commerce and the contribution it's making, what we've also seen is that it differs between our different markets. So, and that really helps us to focus on Africa and how the growth in e-commerce has been a lot slower than with the other markets or the other countries that we operate in. And then I think this is one of the reasons why we are having this discussion to see exactly how we can accelerate that. My fellow panelists have also talked about, Mr. Tunde really talked about infrastructure and earlier as well, payment systems and how we can really combine those. I was privileged to come across a research that was done by two academics, one from the University of Greenwich in the UK and another one from a business school, Anisfield Business School in the US. And what they found looking through 39 different countries in Africa and evaluating the impact of digital technology, especially on the economic impact it has, is that it's not actually what the private sector or businesses are doing, or also what government organizations are doing that is having the most impact. It's actually individual usage. Individuals that are actively using digital technology have the most positive impact when it comes to economic growth. Now, individuals can't directly use it if there is no infrastructure, of course. But I think we have to also now shift the focus to how do we empower individuals, the young people that are native to digital. How do we get their skill set to go up? How do we increase their access, to these transformational technologies, so that we can now see innovation come to play? We can see the ideas they can bring to the table. These are the things that I feel also that we then all have to play a part in really building that human capability within Africa. I recently got involved in blockchain technology. One quick research that came out is the adoption of cryptocurrencies. Now, it's not so much of crypto, but it's about the underlying technology. We've seen Ghana really, driving the e-currencies, Nigeria launching also the e-naira. But it's the underlying technology now. We've seen massive adoption on that through individuals. But I conducted a research on blockchain adoption in supply chain, which is now focused on businesses. And in many cases, practitioners are not aware or even utilizing it. So we see this divide where individuals are using blockchain technology in a different capacity, but businesses are kind of slower to adopt it. But this can be transformational for the effect it would have in Africa. And how do we really address and kind of go about it? I think we still continue to see a persistent digital divide, which it boils down to infrastructure, whether it's within regions, within particular countries, or even within Africa itself. We see digital skill shortages. And this is where our educational institutions have to now look at our curriculum. How do we align it so that we can have skill sets that is directly applicable to the direction that the states and also businesses, want to go, and how we can accelerate, the use of those digital technologies to get more business, to be more global, to attract foreign direct investments. All of these things are what we have to look at. Now, what we have done and what we continue to do at Nestle, I'll just maybe touch on one or two things, is that we actively invest in developing youths. We have a program called Nestle Meets Youth. We also have the Nestantship, which is where we get young people who are finishing school into Nestle internship, expose them to digital technologies, not just that we use within Africa, but also globally. And they do this rotation. And there are teams actually that are currently from Africa in Switzerland, in factories, in supply chain, in transportation, to really get them to see what is possible and how we can enable them to really bring that back and really be part of the workforce that are executing that locally. Another project that we've recently been working on is a partnership with Unesco in Cote d'Ivoire. It's a literacy project for women empowerment, where they get access to an app, they download it, and these are people that are within the Nestle supply chain as well, and they get to learn about basic digital technologies using these applications, and it has an impact on their own livelihood and the things that they can continue to do. And I really feel that this combination of individual, state, and businesses will get us moving farther ahead in terms of digitalization of Africa. COVID brought that realization to the fore. And now it's time for us to embrace the new reality and really forge ahead in this new path. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, my brother, for this, for keeping to time, by the way. I mean, just like the true member of the private sector, time is money. And so you're able to definitely keep us, in good state on that one. So we appreciate very much. But more, striking is really the key points that you've raised here. I don't need to repeat them because they were so eloquently put forth. But one or two things need to be highlighted. The number one thing is the role of individuals, because often we talk about this as if it's just something that is abstract, but generally that individuals who make these things happen, and that's what has been happening. And therefore we need to really, build or capacitate the individuals or empower the individuals so that they can make contributions to the economy as a whole, and in particular young people, and what Nestle is doing there ought to be an example to other private entities who may have the ability and the capacity to support the empowerment of the youth, where the issue is really challenging. Well, on the issue of educational institutions and their role in basically addressing the persistent challenges of digital divide and lack of digital capacity, it's not going to be an easy one. In fact, if this meeting can come up with certain things that can be handled, someone who has been in education for a very, very long time, I can tell you that one sector that doesn't change, at least only change quickly, is the education center or system. You'd be surprised at how long it took the French for them to start to change the educational curriculum from what it used to be, where they were an outlier, and adopted something with more internationalized, where you have a master's and you have a master's degree. And then, of course, the African Francophone countries continued the same pattern that the French gave them. And then you come to the other countries. The study that we did before, when I was still at ECO, showed that many African universities are not educating African young people to solve Africa's problems. In other words, they maintain the same curriculum that they maintained post-colonial period up to this point, when they should be saying, we've got malaria, we've got digitalization, we've got COVID. Can we put in curriculum that will address these things square and frontally and deal with the problem? But anyway, you got me going by mentioning that dimension. I hope I don't take over this panel by my enthusiasm. But anyhow, thank you very much for that. Let me immediately, because time is of essence, invite our next speaker, who I believe also will continue in this line, not only of time, looking at the time, but also give us real stuff, because so far I'm really excited with information that is coming. This is not, it's last but not the least at all. Miss, Kamila Roka is the head of research at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, and so she will give us her views. But before then, let me ask you, Madam, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation has been conducting important research on digital issues, including the scale of the digital divide and its implications for remote learning. So how you see, where from your standpoint and from the Ibrahim Foundation standpoint, what's your thought about this state of Africa's digital transformation, and what can be the opportunities and potentialities, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? I yield the floor to you, Madam, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much to all the contributors so far. It has been extremely interesting to sit here and listen to this wealth of information, wealth of data, and also perspectives. The presentation that we prepared is supported by a slideshow. We are going to talk about data. So I think it's always easy to have something visual to sort of accompany the discussion. So let me put it up for you. I will just ask you to confirm once you can see the full screen of the presentation. Can you all see it? Sometimes it takes a while to sort of pop up. It should be there now.
Okay, let me check and confirm.
Do you see?
Just hang on, I think it's coming. Hopefully it will be.
It should be, yeah.
I think we need to build up a digital capacity in this area as well. Yeah, it says you are sharing.
Just confirm that it's visible, the presentation.
No, it says you are sharing your screen, but we're not seeing it yet. Maybe our,
Let me try again. Yeah, it takes a while sometimes with the sort of various connection issues. Let me try again. Do you see it? Can anyone confirm?
No, not yet. At least I can't. I don't know if others can. I can. But if we have Fasil online, maybe you can make a comment, Fasil. What shall we do?
I will certainly share it with everyone, and in the meantime, I'll get started in the interest of time. Just keep me updated if you see the presentation, okay? So first of all, the perspective of the foundation. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation has been established with a focus of strengthening governance and leadership on the African continent. And also one of the key commitments of the foundation is the role and the importance of data for policymaking, not only the uptake and increased use of data for sound policymaking, but also we work with a lot of African stakeholders to increase the quality and availability of data from Africa and on Africa. So we are going to use quite a lot of reference to data, not only from the main relevant organizations globally who provide us with this important information, but also from our own Ibrahim Index of African Governance, which is the most comprehensive tool to assess governance from a number of different standpoints, from human rights to rule of law to access to health, access to education, as well as digital access, telecom access, and energy access. So let me get started. Doesn't really allow me to do that. Sorry, I have a problem with this screen share. I might.
Yeah, I wish you that if you had sent it to our IT people, maybe they would have been able to do it. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But if you can continue and then share the presentation afterwards, that would be also good.
Yes, it's okay. Fantastic. I will continue without the presentation then. So basically, first of all, what we want to draw attention on is the continent digital potential. As we already discussed this, I'm going to run really quickly through this. There is in Africa a young generation of digital entrepreneurs which are adapting to new global conditions and specifically will have a major role in the post-COVID-19 recovery. In Africa, there are over 640 tech hubs active. 80% of young Africans own a mobile phone, and 70%, almost 80% of these use their phone on a daily basis. And Africa has the world's highest number of mobile money accounts. So a huge digital potential, which is already in the making. We just want to remind that digitalization is also an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog, in the sense that digitalization is strongly linked, as we already discussed today, to increased access to financial services, digital payments, but also it has proved to be beneficial for improving access and provision of social safety nets, for instance. We have examples from the country of Togo, where a surge in internet coverage and access between 2018 and 2019 has led to an increased leverage of digital technology and digital tools to deliver cash transfers to workers in the informal sector during the pandemic. And also digital technology is fundamental for health. And here we have the example of Rwanda, who have seen a notable increase in mobile phone use and mobile internet access over the last decade. And they have been able to utilize IT frameworks to support health workers in the whole contact tracing phase of the pandemic. So really, we are not just talking about digital in its own pillar, but it is a sector that has so many spillover effects on a number of challenges that are facing the continent. When we look at access to digital technology in Africa, this has significantly improved since 2010. Every African country has more households with internet access in 2019 than in 2010. Every African country but Nigeria has more households with computer in 2019 than in 2010. Every country but Libya has more mobile phone subscriptions in 2019 than in 2010, and 3G coverage has improved in every country in Africa but Eritrea in the last decade. So we also, in the slides that we will share, have provided which countries are faring the best and the worst in all these elements. So you will see it in a minute. What is the challenge, however? We have seen a lot of potential. A lot of potential is already in the making. However, what is holding this back? What is holding this back is still in too many African countries, access to digital, such as internet and computer, is still low. In 2019, there were only 10 African countries where over 50% of households had internet access. And in 2019 also, there were only 5 African countries where over 50% of households had computer access. In sum, as we discussed today, we call this digital divide. And when we use our Ibrahim Index of African Governance to understand sort of trends and performance of every African country in terms of the digital divide, so we move beyond the continental average, we see that certainly there has been a huge improvement. So we need to underline also the success story. 53 African countries have improved in terms of digital access since 2010. However, the challenge is not this, but is the level. The level is still really, really low. So the message here should be the continent should continue to sustain the progress and continue sustaining progress with an aim to really score higher, because when we look at the sort of capacity in terms of digital access compared to the global levels, we are still quite relatively weak. We have also analyzed the digital divide and how this interacts with COVID-19 response measures. First of all, social protection measures were limited by the digital divide, as many in Africa could not access cash transfers. And we saw in the example of Togo how important this is for that. In Africa also, we saw a very unique challenge related to education that was impacted by the digital divide, in the sense that we all know that across the world, the pandemic has led to school closures, and this is nothing new. In Africa, school closures were relatively lower than the global average. They were like about 30 weeks, whereas the global average was 35 weeks. But what was key in Africa is that school closures meant out of learning. Why? Because while in the global world, the response to school closures was to move learning to digital tools, remote tools, Zoom, and all that. In Africa, this was not possible. 50% of Africa's children have no access to any remote learning tools, which means not only internet, but also television and radio, which are other supporting tools. So it means that basically these weeks of out of school have been weeks of no learning at all for Africa students. Also, digital divide has repercussions for democracy, for inequalities, and for gender. The increased use of e-governance and e-democracy initiatives, which is fundamental for like stronger democratic processes, it's also counterproductive because it excludes those who lack digital means. Rural-urban inequalities, you have already sort of mentioned this in your excellent presentation this morning. We know that areas without internet coverage are predominantly rural, and so the digital divide enhances this inequality. And gender inequalities, they have been mentioned already this morning. Across 8 African countries, the proportion of adolescent girls with ICT skills is on average 3.4 percentage points lower than that for boys. Let's look now at what can be done. What are the challenges that need to be bridged to do better in terms of bridging the digital divide? First of all, we have an issue of cost, speed, and security. The relative cost of internet in Africa is highest in any world region. And the costs have been stagnating in most African countries over the decade compared to a global average where the costs have been going down. Internet speed is one of the 5 lowest scoring IAG indicators in our index of African governance in 2019. And also internet security is a challenge in the sense that 8 countries score 100, which is the maximum score in internet security in our index in 2019. But the problem is that 30 countries score less than 10, which is very low. So these are the sort of immediate challenges to overcome and bridge the digital divide. However, as our colleague from Côte d'Ivoire and others have highlighted, the elephant in the room is the fact that no digital economy can happen without energy access. I mean, access to energy is a key priority for the continent, and we want to remind everyone that there is like a strong correlation based on the use of our data in the index, a strong correlation between access to energy and digital access scores. The strong correlation means that these two, the performance in these 2 indicators goes hand in hand, and it's highly dependent one from the other.
Madam, your time is up. If you don't mind, can you?
Yeah, I have the 2 more points to make. The population in Africa that has no access to electricity amounts to over 600 million people. And this is a key data point because this is equivalent to almost twice the total population of the US and 1.3 times the population of the European Union. And on the other hand, what we need to think about is the fact that Africa is facing a unique challenge. the challenge of electrifying, of bridging this huge energy divide, but at the same time, they have to do so without emissions, because as you know, what has come up from COP26 has been a sort of unfavorable outcome for Africa. And the last point that I wanted to make is a point about data. In Africa, over 50% of children do not have a legal existence, meaning they are not registered at birth. This is an overarching challenge that doesn't seem to be very much related to what we discussed so far, but in fact it is, because to enable sound policies, countries need to know their constituencies, need to know how many citizens they need to serve and how their constituencies are composed of. And so we really want to recall the importance of going back to the roots and strengthen civil registration and vital statistics to enable a better access to digital, a better access to energy for all. I will share the presentation shortly in the chat. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that elaborate presentation, which highlights the critical issue, which we call the overarching challenge of data. I think that's essential, that's very important. And also the issues relating to the critical problem of digital divide and how profound it is at various levels, whether you're talking about, and the impact it has on existing challenges, gender inequality, issues of impact on democracy and impact on rural and urban divide that's already been exacerbated by this. And we look forward to receiving your presentation. But I also pinpoint some of the points you made about the fact that digitalization can help Africa to leapfrog and the need to pay attention to what is happening with the young generation, where you have the real generation of digital entrepreneurs and experts who are coming up. Now, I think we have received from this distinguished panel, as promised, they haven't really disappointed. As a matter of fact, they have reached us and they're giving us a whole lot to chew. I probably have opportunity for one or two questions, and I remind the participants that if you want to send in questions, you use the button that says Q&A. It's easy for us to know that it's a question and answer. If you put it in the chat, there are so many things going on in the chat that's difficult for us to go in and dig out the questions, but I managed to dig out one. And if anybody has a question, they may also raise their hand, their flag, so we can see if we can take one or two questions for the participants before we wrap up the session. Donc, je vais lire la première question que j'ai reçue sur le chat room. C'est une question qui vient de Cyprien Mbonigaba. Il a posé cette question aux panélistes, mais aussi aux modérateurs. Ma question est la suivante. Ne trouvez pas de contradiction entre cette volonté d'avancer rapidement vers la transformation numérique en Afrique post-Covid-19 et le manque d'infrastructures de base, ordinateurs, connexion, Internet, dans plusieurs pays africains. So as we wait for other questions, let me throw this to the floor to whoever feels, who is a panelist who wants to take on this. Since you're the experts, I'll leave that to you. The easy questions I will answer, the tough ones I'll leave to you. Please take the floor if you want to, the panelists, please.
Thank you, Prof. If I can, Chair, if I can come in quickly. I think the question is an excellent one. I would perhaps go back to one of our recommendations of digital community workers. We know that there are significant technologies, opportunities that have been covered, whether it's digital ID, whether it's e-payments, whether it's e-commerce. But the infrastructure deficit and the infrastructure implications, the capacity building is not fully there. So having a linkage, having hundreds of thousands of potentially young people who are employed to provide that connectivity to the community, to be able to demonstrate, show the way, but also have some of these technologies which may be limited, whether they're smartphones or tablets, shared, just like we see Uber and Airbnb sharing what were previously single-use facilities. We can do that on the infrastructure side, on the device side, while bridging the gap in terms of power, capacity, and other things by having people in the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking that question. I don't see any other hand up unless I'm advised otherwise. If that is not the case, I will probably give the floor to each of the participants to quickly give us, okay, I see one question from there. This is a question that is from Uganda, Michael Wamai, who asked the question, we have heard all the numbers about internet penetration, but we have not had a lot of discussion on content development. Many of the fast movers have generated a lot of content, and that is why there is a lot of concentration in a few countries. This means many of us in Africa are consumers of the digital content generated by the developed countries. I'm not sure this is a question, but it's what they call a statement that is deep, and that requires somebody to say something about it that may solicit comment. I'll throw it open to any panelists who want to take this, please.
That's a good question here, and I can start with that. And I am making a slight assumption that this is also digital content, and we can see that varied across the different spectrum from businesses that are creating content about their products and services. We can see it from access to, for example, Netflix, which is making inroads in African countries. We can also see it even from just individuals that are creating social media content that go viral, or just talking about their own lives. I think the onus on content development would be an initiative that the users of the technology then have to ideate on. These opportunities are there. And we have seen across different African countries how individuals, businesses are leveraging the little opportunities that is growing that they have. So I think from a content development perspective, it would be much more the entities that would really step up to create to create those content. But now the enablement is there. You can create something in Uganda and we can consume it all over Africa and even beyond Africa. So it's time for us now to step up and give what would have been very difficult for the world to appreciate. With digital, we can go to the world in seconds, and we can do that now. So I think that's actually more of a challenge for us to step up and really, show what we can do and what we have in Africa for the rest of the world to see.
Thank you very much for that. So with this, let me go again straight to the panelists in reverse order this time, starting with Ms. Camilla Roca to give us 1 minute of her wrap-up statement or conclusion so that we can end this session because time is very, very much against us. Madam, you have the floor, please, 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Well, I mean, if I have to highlight like 3 key points for action going forward, I would say that first of all, we really need to reconnect policymaking with strong and reliable data, because as we said, it is unacceptable that 1 every 2 children are not registered at birth. It means we don't have right statistics to inform sound policies. Secondly, the challenge of energy access. We cannot have 600 million people off grid. As we said, this is equivalent to 2 times the population of the US. Imagine what would be the US, twice the size of what it is now without energy access. And thirdly, I think just a comment on the latest question that we have received. It is true that Africa is very much dependent on what is happening outside. We know also Africa is fully dependent on imports from the outside world, is fully dependent on policies and influenced by what is happening on the outside world. Our founder and chair, Mo Ibrahim, has always been saying since the pandemic that every crisis is an opportunity to do better, to build back better. And a key point that we want to share from our analysis is that this opportunity is an opportunity to rebuild Africa's growth models. And we talk about many growth models because Africa is not a country, it's made of different realities. And a sort of fil rouge of this building back better should be more ownership, more reliance on African-owned ideas, initiatives, because the potential is there. It's just a matter of taking the time to reflect and invest on the capacity that is already huge and existing within the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Somebody very prominent wrote a book some time ago titled Planning Without Data, because that is really what was happening in Africa. We used to plan without data. And so it's like the French will say, come navigate à vue, or you're navigating in the dark. You're not sure what you're planning or for whom you're planning, how many people you expect. So with that, let me pass on to Mr. Onitiju. You have the floor for maybe 3 key points, just as Madam Broker has started the trend that you take from we should retain. Yes.
Thank you so much. If there is one thing, I would say we need to be bold. We need to be bold to move ahead with digital acceleration. Whether we like it or not, things will continue to happen that will push us back. COVID is one. Sustainability challenges is another that is coming. It's already here. So we need to be bold. And how do we know that things are looking positive? When we look at what is happening in Africa today, about 7 unicorns, 4 of them are in fintech. Netflix, as I mentioned earlier, is making inroads. Main one, as Mr. Tine mentioned, was recently acquired. There is so much going for us already. So this is the time for us to really be bold. And as an organization with Nestle, a lot of investments coming into Africa as well, manufacturing, supply chain, building digital capability. That's because we know that this is the time for Africa to really embrace digital and to leapfrog even other. We don't have the legacy baggage that other continents have. So for us, we can chart a new path. And we have to start today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those words of wisdom. Mr. Fafuwa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Prof. A pleasure. I'll just make 2 points. First is that the global digital transformation is occurring before, behind, and with us in Africa. And therefore, our participation seat at the table is really critical. In too many global forums, we're not seeing enough African voices. We have the experts, we have the capability, but as one leader has said, if we're not at a seat at the table, we have to get a folding chair and put ourselves at the table. So I would like to throw that call out to all of us and many of the distinguished panelists and experts and others here to make sure that we have a seat at the table. Secondly, I think within the continent, there is a need for further collaboration. There's so many opportunities, there are challenges, there are different organizations working on different portions. And while there is quite a bit of collaboration, I would say there's a lot more need for all of us to work together. And the ACBF is playing a key role, and we would like that to expand because capacity building is at the center, and we need your continued support there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we hear you loud and clear. And the last session actually in this meeting tomorrow will be on partnerships. And I hope that they will capitalize on these wise words of yours to really come out with concrete ways of expanding and deepening these partnerships and collaboration to the benefit of everyone. And on the issue of what we call it, being at the table, the saying goes that if you're not in the kitchen when the meal is being cooked, you can wind up being part of the menu. So you probably need to pay attention to that and make sure that that is not the case. So we hear you loud and clear. Africa's voice and effective representation in international fora is a critical aspect of this. Next will be Professor Ahure. You have the floor. Vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
D'accord. Ma connexion n'étant pas très bonne, je vais y aller rapidement. Juste pour dire que c'est vrai, tous les pays africains sont à l'heure de la planification et nous devons intégrer dans tous nos plans, dans toutes nos analyses prospectives, le besoin d'investir énormément dans la numérisation ou dans le développement numérique. Il y a des potentialités, les jeunes, les femmes, les compétences, il y a les startups. Il faut aussi créer l'écosystème nécessaire avec les financements qui vont avec, tant dans les infrastructures que dans le développement des services. Je m'arrêterai à ce niveau-là.
Merci.
Tant dans les infrastructures que dans le développement des services, dans les compétences. Parce que notre avenir dépendra de notre capacité à réduire les fractures numériques.
Merci beaucoup. Then I'll give the last word to Dr. Coleman. Certainly not the least, but the last word. Dr. Coleman, just take a minute or so to give us a few points, 2-3 points that we need to
Thank you, Prof. For me, 3 key issues. One, telephony penetration in the continent will come to nothing without reliable internet. And 2, digitalization should be seen as a shared vision. Working in silos will be counterproductive. There's a need for coordinated effort to ensure that, coordinated and conscious effort to ensure that as a continent, we digitalize. To this end, my final point, policymakers, governments should prioritize digitalization with the requisite investment in order to put the continent on the right track towards effective digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I will join everybody that has been participating in this meeting in really thanking, very much our distinguished panelists for the wisdom that they have shared with us today. I won't even attempt to summarize it, but in case many of you did not understand the trick, that's the reason why I asked you to summarize, so you do my job for me. I don't have to do it for you, and then we can just go ahead to close. But in any case, I think you were so eloquent and so direct, and you don't need any more summary than the key points that you've raised, which from the comments I'm receiving, everybody is grateful for all these insightful interventions that you have done today. But let me just simply put that everything we're talking about will come to nothing if we don't make it people-centered. So it's about welfare of people and it's about development. Digitalization for what? It is for improve the lives of people and to develop the continent. And we need to also recognize that at the center of this is government. Whether we are pro-public sector or against it, no matter what, the government has to play a role. And it will play a role not alone, but with the other key stakeholders in the society, whether they are non-state actors and other development partners. Everybody has a role to play. But infrastructure dimension is important. The conditions that are necessary are quite important. But if there's a lesson we have learned from the countries that developed very not distant past, is the following: we can no longer say that until all the conditions are put together, they are ideal. The necessary conditions must be in place. You must have complete peace and security. You must have good governance. You must have everything. If you wait for that, you probably wait forever. The point is that development must happen despite all these challenges. The question for us is, how do we develop in spite of these obstacles? Or as we try to address these obstacles, because you still need to address them anyway. And then you start from what is working and move forward to the other areas, so that we don't try to, and you learn from others as well, so you don't reinvent the wheel. But that having been said, let me once again thank you for this extremely, very, very interesting session. And I think everybody will agree with me. The last point I'll make is that there's a request from here that someone says they would be grateful if all the speakers could please share their speeches or their presentations with us. We are compiling the report of the meeting, and the email address that is given is ajerome4@hotmail.com. ajerome4@hotmail.com. Please, we will appreciate it if you can share your comments with us. Thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you will still find the opportunity, as busy as you are, to continue to participate in the meeting and also to continue this engagement. And Mr. Fafunwa, I take your point very, very seriously. We need to continue to work together as organizations who are shooting for Africa's sustainable development to push this agenda forward, because this is especially critical for the continent's development. Thank you very much. Madame la modératrice, je vous redonne la parole et merci infiniment. À bientôt. And please, I wish everybody all the best and take care.
Merci beaucoup, Professeur Emmanuel Nadezier. Thank you for your time. You took over the 60 minutes accorded, but we know it's the start of the session, the very first session, and so many issues had to be addressed first before we continued. We thank you for your moderation of the very first session on understanding digital transformation, states, implications, and potential for building back Africa better. We thank the different speakers, 5 of them who were actively participating, Dr. Anthony Coleman, Professor Alban Ahure, Mr. Tunde Fafunwa, Mr. Ibukun Onitiju, I'm sorry if I didn't get that right, and Ms. Coleman Roka. Would love, if it's not too much asking that means, to have all the participants, all the speakers and the moderator in a group photograph so we can keep that for posterity. We remember that the photograph, the photo session that we had, that opening ceremony, did not garner that many faces. So would love for a group photograph to be had. So please kindly open up your videos so a group photograph can be had of us all while we sink into a health break. We've been talking for a while now, but before we get into the health break, we have so many comments, like Professor Nadozie was saying, so many comments coming in, a lot of them suggestions, questions. We are certain that during the second session and the third session, we should be able, to give answers to some of those questions that are still coming up, and also open the minds of participants to some of the observations that they have. Good ones too. Also, interestingly, not very positive ones coming in. We're open for that. So thank you for this group photograph. Are we having it right now, or have we already had it? Thank you very much for the group photograph. We shall be moving in, as I said just a few minutes back, into a health break. We've been talking for over 3 hours, close to 3 hours now, and we should be able to take a little respite, drink some water, stretch our nerves, make sure that we relax a little, and then we shall be getting back in 10 minutes to begin the second session of the day. So thank you, dear panelists, thank you, experts, thank you, decision makers, and thank you, the different representatives of the various think tanks that we have across Africa on this forum today. We shall be meeting in the next 10 minutes to resume session 2 of day 1 of the 2021 Africa Think Tank Summit on Digital Transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, experts, policy executioners, and the big brains that we have from all over Africa and other parts of the world, participants from wherever you are switching in from, thank you for assembling again right now, following the end of our 10-minute health break, where I presume we did a lot of stretching exercises to relax our top nerves after over 3 hours of discussions and sitting behind our digital devices. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the 2021 Africa Think Tank Summit, a think tank summit that is organized by the African Capacity Building Foundation. We are looking at ways of building Africa better after the COVID-19 pandemic, post-COVID-19, and of course, ways of transforming the different digital answers and solutions that we have, and leveraging on the strengths of Africa to be able to produce better results and have resilience for our economies. Without much ado, we will be getting right on with the second session of the day. This session will be moderated by Mr. Yarik Turiansky, Deputy Program Head of the African Governance and Diplomacy, SAIA, of South Africa. Mr. Uriansky, together with his fellow panelists, will discuss in the next 60 minutes. I have to underline that, 60 minutes. They will discuss initiatives to foster digital transformation in Africa as they look at ways of sharing experiences at the continental, regional, and the national levels. Mr. Yarik Turiansky, you have the floor, and of course, you will introduce the panelists, the different speakers of the second session. Mr. Yarik Turiansky, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the kind introductions. Much appreciated, and also a big thank you to the organizers of this worthwhile event for inviting me to moderate the session. So, Madam Chair, as you've underlined, we only have 60 minutes. I can assure you that my laptop and my watch are both fully charged, and I will be very strict with time, and I will be constantly monitoring the time and ensuring that all four of our distinguished speakers have sufficient time to make their presentations, and that hopefully we still have a bit of discussion time left at the end. So my introduction remarks are not going to be very long, just to reiterate that the name of the session is Initiatives to Foster Digital Transformation in Africa, sharing experiences at the continental, regional, and national levels. So of course, looking forward to hearing from four of our panelists, specifically in terms of how digitalization has been accelerated during the pandemic. I think that in spite of numerous academic disagreements, the one a common theme that experts agree on is that, in fact, COVID has had a positive impact in the sense that digitalization accelerated on the African continent at all these three levels. So I'm sure that there will be a lot of interesting case studies and practical examples that we will be hearing. Also, in the interest of time, I'm not going to be doing long-winded introductions of all the participants, just stating their name and which organization they represent. So without further ado, we've got Dr. Jonathan Pinifolo, who is the Digital Financial Inclusion Manager at the CAMESA Business Council. Dr. Pinifolo, please, the floor is yours. You have 8 minutes, and I will make sure to send you a quick ping reminder in the chat as soon as that time is up. And then also to all the participants, and I see this, we've got over 100 people who have joined us today. Please feel free to also post your questions in the Q&A during the presentations, because very often there's a rush to post questions at the end of all presentations, and then there's just not enough time to go through them. So if you have a question or a comment during one of the presentations, please do make sure to posted in the Q&A. And now over to you, Dr. Pinifolo. Madam Chair, do we seem to be missing one of our panelists, because I haven't seen that Dr. Pinifolo has joined us?
Maybe if Dr. Kenifola is not here with us, we can move over to the second speaker while we await his arrival or his return, if he has not yet joined us. So we can take our second speaker.
Thank you for your guidance on that, Madam Chair. I agree with that way forward. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Karim El Ainouawi, who's the Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South, which is based in Morocco. The floor is yours, sir. I believe I haven't seen you in about 3 years since the last edition of the Atlantic Dialogues that I've attended. So it's good to see you, albeit virtually, and of course, looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you, Chair. Pleasure to see you again, and thank you for the organizers to invite us. Let me want to focus on a very simple point, but at the same time quite complex to execute. I think ICT, technology, digital transformation, successes in this area hinges a lot on the nexus which combines public policies, and hence the state, the government and its policies, academia, and of course the private sector, and in general stakeholders, NGOs, etc. And there's no success, sustainable success beyond imitation, and even for good imitation, even more for innovation, in terms of combining those three pillars. Let me take a very simple example. If you don't have a strong telecom sector, a strong backbone, physical backbone for the internet, with a wide access, competitive access, would be very difficult to do anything in the area of digital transformation. And this, of course, raises other questions, which is about competition, regulation. What is the role of the government in terms of policies? Do you have an independent regulator? Do you have open competition? Are you able to give access to the internet to your population in remote areas where talent could be living? So I think this is, some countries have been quite successful on the continent, others less so, but it is a fundamental pillar. I think you cannot do anything if you have great regulation. Let me take the financial sector, as I was a former central banker. If you want innovation in the financial sector, you need to have sort of very open policies where you have very strong incumbents that are that are in a way natural monopolies in this sector to provide financial sector. You need to have appropriate policies and a strong independent central bank to facilitate entries of innovators in this area. And some countries in the continent, again, such as Kenya and others, have been quite successful in this area. So public policy matters. And the quality of public policy matters, the transparency of public policy matters, institution matters. The next one, you cannot have innovation and successful, again, and endogenous, sustainable digital transformation if you don't have a strong linkage with academia and research in general. And this is the second pillar of this nexus. And academia, of course, that does fundamental research, but also does applied and research and development. And of course, linked to that is, of course, finance, venture capitalism, and funds and other things that are able to nurture and to provide the appropriate incentives, the fertile ecosystem for young entrepreneurs, and for you to have a flourishing digital transformation sector that will irrigate all your economy and become a competitive edge of your national economy. The third one is the one that reacts, like academia in a way, to incentives and the general policies in the field, is of course the private sector and social entrepreneurs, if you want. So in a way, this is the combination, and it's a very complex and very subtle balancing act that you need to put together so as to have and to foster digital transformation. It's not easy. It requires constant adaptation. It requires the capacity of the government to experiment, to correct, to adjust its policies across also, of course, the political cycles that all countries in the continent go through. So you can get a booster through FDI. The case in point in Morocco, for instance, around the aeronautics and automobile industries, they've brought together with the subcontractor, creating a very complex net of providers and service, as well as goods and intermediate parts that use intensively artificial intelligence and digital technologies, robotics, etc. So you can get through the FDI a strong impetus, a strong supplement to what you're doing with your national companies or within your domestic market. In the end, it's all about talent and, of course, the quality of the education sector, but not only. It's about talent in general. There are very interesting experiments that we're having here in Morocco, actually, with the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University. We have 1337 school, which is a sort of a school without professors, goes through peer learning, open to students, to talent without any degrees. And it has been quite successful in producing talent that will then go, and specifically in the area of technology, digital programming, etc. That has been quite successful. So I think it has to do as much as, to investment in infrastructure, public policies, and your talent factory, basically academia, schools, research, and etc. And this is the lesson we draw here from Morocco and what we know from other countries on the continent. If you want to move, particularly if you want to move from imitation and importing and copying technology that's been developed elsewhere to being innovative, to be able to reach out to the larger part of your population, but also, of course, to irrigate your economy in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ainoui. Much appreciated the fact that you stuck to time. It makes my job easier because I don't have to then ping you and harass you and ask you to please wrap up. So very focused presentation, focusing on the 3 points. Completely agree with you about the point that you've made about strong telecom sector being a crucial part as a digital backbone for digitalization in any country, and even would take it further in terms of infrastructure and argue that something as basic as electricity situation in the country often needs to be addressed to provide an opportunity for people to be able to run their businesses online, et cetera, et cetera. I'm based in South Africa, and of course, that's a country that's subject to frequent load shedding or rolling power blackouts. I remember a few years ago, there was a big push for the fourth industrial revolution about 3-4 years ago. And many of those workshops took place in the dark and without PowerPoints because of these power cuts. It was quite ironic that academics and government officials were pushing the idea of the fourth industrial revolution, where the government was not able to provide basic infrastructure such as electricity to enable the digital rollout. But certainly looking forward to engaging with some of these ideas a bit later in the session. And of course, if any of the participants would like to pose a question to Mr. Ainoui, please do so in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to incorporate them. So we will be going to our second presenter now. It's Mr. Taurai Chinyamakovu. So even though I took a long time to pronounce that surname, I hope that I did it properly, sir, because you have a very long surname, and as someone who also has a long surname, I can appreciate that people quite often mispronounce it. And Mr. Chinyamakovu is a partner and investor in Flowcash Zimbabwe, and he's also the founder of Pazimba. So we look forward to hearing your insights over the next 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Yarek. I think you did very well in pronouncing my name. You're not the only one who struggles with it. So that should be okay. I was asked to share as a participant or an operator in the private sector. So we run a digital payments platform. So I'm going to share from that perspective. So let me start by saying that this topic is an appropriate theme, the topic about the digital transformation post-COVID on the African continent. Why I think it's an appropriate theme is because it's well-timed, because the pandemic has affected all facets of life, including economic activity across the continent, creating setbacks in terms of lost productivity and trade within and among countries. I was reading about the impact of COVID-19, and the UNCTAD modeled a stagnation in Africa in GDP as considering all dynamics related to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as a drop in total African exports of about 17%. So that's a significant decline in exports from the continent. It's also appropriate because traditionally, technology has been viewed as an enabler, but we as operators in the digital space argued differently. So we posit that it must be viewed very, very differently. Technology is the economy, is the politics, it is development. We should not at all view it as an enabler to trade, development, economics, and so forth. It is actually, it constitutes what development is, constitutes what politics is, it constitutes what the economy is. So when you look at the scale, for example, if you compare with other countries and continents, take a look at the US. If you just look at the NASDAQ, where there are tech companies listed there, you actually come to the conclusion that technology is the economy. And digitalization is the backbone of that economy, and that's the future. Let me talk briefly about Flowcash and our role in digital transformation on the continent. Flowcash operates in over 50 countries in the Middle East, Africa, and is the largest travel payments processor on the continent, serving some of the largest airlines connecting the African countries and the world. For example, we serve the largest airlines that fly into the continent: Ethiopian, Emirates, Qatar, Air Senegal, SA Airlink, Rwanda Air, and so forth, and many others. We also provide digital payments managed services to mid-sized banks to enable them to deliver Visa and MasterCard solutions. This helps them to integrate into mainstream global payment platforms. Because we're in the travel payment space and the digital banking environment, for us, the pandemic presented both opportunities and threats. Obviously, on the travel payment side, the pandemic curtailed domestic and continental travel. That's on the threat side. But on the opportunity side, we were able to get a lot of traffic moving from physical office visits to transitioning to the digital platforms. And this is consistent, for those who are familiar with the travel environment or the travel space, with what IATA is trying to focus on, transitioning all airlines and travel players into what's known as new distribution capability framework, which enables all those players to do business digitally. So that's what Flowcase is working on, and that's what it's all about. Because we're in the travel space, so we face those threats and we face those opportunities. The most important development, though, is that it forced a transition on everybody to move to digital economics across the board, right? So now we see a lot of players who are trying to sell their stuff online. They've opened e-commerce platforms, and they want people to visit those platforms and do trade instead of doing trade physically in their retail channels. So that's a very key aspect of what we need to base our digital transformation as a continent on. So what's the post-COVID-19 digital opportunity? In our view as operators across the continent, across 50 African countries and into the Middle East, and as the largest travel payment processor on the continent, we think that any post-COVID-19 transition must leverage the forced adoption of digital economic dynamics. So everybody was forced into this space. How do we trade? How do we do business in the midst of the pandemic without physical engagement? So a lot has come into play. Telecommuting, people are working from home. We are here doing online conferencing. There's e-commerce that's growing, online payments, e-health, and many other digital innovations that are beginning to grow, right? So that's been forced on us. So that's the good news. Instead of how do we then grow from those shoots? Instead of governments viewing technology as an enabler, it should instead be an enabler to technology. So traditionally, as I've argued, technology is seen as an enabler. But we think that governments need to be the enablers to technology, because we think technology is the economics, that's development, and that's really the economy. There are three ways through which governments can do that. Number one, they can let regulation follow innovation. So let innovators innovate, allow them enough space to play, and then when that space is established, you then start crafting rules that support and regulate and enable those players in that space. Number two, invest and direct resources towards innovation. There are multiple ways of doing this. For example, governments could invest in innovation hubs. At the moment, in most African countries, this is basically being done by NGOs and some funding from outside. But we think that the governments across the continent can direct resources towards this. These hubs enable innovative, digitally savvy, techno-savvy youngsters to play around and test a lot of ideas in that space. And number three, the governments also need to direct resources towards universities, so that those universities work with innovators. One of the most interesting things about academia in Africa is that it's, perhaps in my opinion, the only continent that doesn't marry industry to innovation, to technology and new enterprises. So once our universities collaborate more closely with industry in problem solving, we think that there will be a good takeoff as we transition post-COVID-19 into a digital economy. Innovators in Africa significantly lack funding, which innovators also have access to. So take, for example, Silicon Valley. There's a very good combination of venture capital, legal advisors, and an ecosystem that supports ideas that transition into digital players that anchor the digital economy. So we think that in Africa, we need to provide that sort of environment, right? And that sort of environment requires some government intervention. We are not going to be a Silicon Valley of any kind. So we need the governments to be able to invest in providing venture capital. It's very hard for companies to build from the ground up without venture capital. So a lot of venture capital is required going into the space to support the digitalization opportunity. The reason is venture capital will follow opportunity, and Africa is very fragmented with 50 African countries. Not a lot of people are interested in investing in digital solutions in a small African country. That's why you see a lot of venture capital traffic goes into Nigeria and sometimes in South Africa, because they have the scale. Many other African countries are too small to have the scale required by venture capital. So governments need to invest resources into kickstarting those opportunities and supporting the venture capital ecosystem. Lastly, the digital opportunity for continental commerce following the AFC FTA needs to be aligned with post-pandemic transformation programs to ensure that free trade happens, as this helps companies to scale. As I have said, there was a lot of e-commerce being tapped into, there are a lot of digital payments, fintech opportunities being tapped into during the COVID lockdowns. Now, as we get an exit out of that situation, it's very important for entrepreneurs that are looking to scale to look at the continent as a big market space. And that's what gives them scale. So if you're going into that space and all you face are barriers, boundaries, and all sorts of regulations, if I am in Zimbabwe and I want to sell to Zambia and it's a nightmare doing it, I want to sell to the Congo and it's a nightmare doing it, then we as a continent, in pursuit of the AFC FTA arrangement or framework, we need to break down those barriers to ensure that commerce flourishes and digital commerce takes our ability to trade to the next level. Those are the key insights that I just wanted to share. Thank you, and I'll take questions and share my presentation later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chinya Makovu. Much appreciated, specifically picking up on two points that you made that I found very salient. First one is that technology is now the economy, politics, and development. I think that's a very interesting view, because previously, having spoken to some of your colleagues in the technical and fintech sector a few years ago, they always promoted technology as an enabler, saying that technology is the pipe rather than the water. But I think that you make a very important point with everything that's happened in the past year and a half. And technology is increasingly becoming, the most important part of our lives, from data to our laptops to mobile devices. And the second point is about the government and regulators as a starting point, giving space to technological innovators. And indeed, similar, I think, lessons in South Africa. Often colleagues in the technology sectors that I speak to put forth the view that policymakers are not even one or two, but 3 or 4 steps behind when it comes to technology. And they also fundamentally misunderstand it. So they don't want support from the government. They don't want help from the government. They just want the government to leave them alone, let them be, allow them to innovate, rather than impeding them with policy and regulation that is poorly thought out and perhaps does not work or help them grow their business. So thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. And once again, a note to our participants, if you have any questions, please do post them in the Q&A. We'll make sure to go through all 3 of our presenters at the end of the discussion. And right now we will be heading to our third presenter for the day. It's Dr. Isia Cobalo, who is the Assistant Professor of Linguistics at the Université des Lettres in Bamako, Mali. So Dr. Cobalo, you have the floor, and we look forward to hearing your insights. Dr. Cobalo, are you with us?
I'm sorry. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I am Isia Cobalo, and I'm very glad to participate in the debate about, transforming Africa in a digital way. Today, I'm going to talk about some experience that have been conducted in Mali here since the outbreak of COVID-19 in 2020, mainly in the month of March. I have been working with a project, I'm not the main person in the project, but I have been involved in it by the link of my university, which is the University of Literature and Linguistics. The project is called Robo Mali. Robo Mali, they are taking into account what we call artificial intelligence about Malian languages. In Mali here, the most spoken language is Bamanankan, which is called Bambara. And they have, created a tool for automatic translation between French and Bambara language. And for doing so, they needed some university teachers and some students, to help them continue with the project. And last year, no, not this year, in the month of April, and they came to my university, and I have been, working with them about collecting data for, for pairing, sentences, French and Bamanankan, Bambara. And for doing so, they needed, a couple of students, to take part so that they can be what we call, the new dynamic, the new actors for the project. And we chose about 20 students, and those 20 students have been working with them with the project, and today they have more than 5,000 pairings between Bamanankan sentences and French sentences. This is the beginning, and the tool itself is not available for everybody, for the public yet, but the basis, the background is already set. And the project wants to go beyond 5,000 pairing of sentences with the findings they have got from some foundation like a Rockefeller Foundation, like a foundation called the Kunafan, and they want to go through the project and until they achieve about 50,000 pairing of sentences between Bamanankan and French. And for doing so, the project is continuing to collect data and to go through deep learning, to go through what we call the crowdsourcing, but yet crowdsourcing is not the step yet, but it is a part of the steps. As we're talking about the Bayalamambaga project, meaning the automatic translation of Bamanankan, they created a website platform in which the students can interact, put the result of the translation between Bamanankan and French, and they collect them and they put them into the machine system. And today, what is left is to continue with the documentation. We do not have yet as much document in Bamanankan as in French or as in English, because those languages have been written very long ago. That's why we have, full documentation on those languages. But Bamanankan, as we're talking about that language, is not yet has not yet many documents about literature, about chemistry, about biology, about what we call even the songs, the poems, things like that. And they want to collect data, but how to write them? This is those are some difficulties that the project is facing today. And I'm not the main agent of the project, but because of my university, I have been involved in the project. And since we have been working together, I can tell you these are the reports about the activities that we have been doing together. And moreover, in Mali here, since the outbreak of the COVID-19 in last year in Mali, people are conscious today of one thing, and this is, the digitalized world. It is not possible today to work without the digital tools, without, connecting something to the digital resources. And that's why many university teachers here today are conscious about lectures on website about giving the classes to students even without being in a classroom, in a physical classroom. So it has been possible now to know many tools about those activities, such as the tool with which we are working right now, Zoom. People, even the scholars, didn't know very much about Zoom before the COVID-19 outbreak. And things like Team, Microsoft Team, teachers are very well in those things today. They can, be in contact with other lecturers outside Mali through those things, and they can follow people from outside through those tools also. And I think we have little experience about, artificial intelligence in Mali, but the main project that I've been talking about, the Balemambaga project, is one which is doing its own way without a government, because it is an association. And this center is in the yard of my university. And I think it is going to be, as we say, a declic, a starting point, because the need of our national languages is very, very very talked in Mali today. And we cannot do it without the use of the artificial intelligence and with the linguistics, tools, grammar, morphology, and phonetics, many things like this, and to implement artificial intelligence with the tools like computers, like iPad and cell phones. I think I have been, talking about many things, but I have a last thing to tell you about RoboMali's project. The last thing is the project has got some fundings, and from CUNAFAM, from Rockefeller Foundation. With those fundings, they are going, to create about 50,000 pairing of sentences, and at that level, they will leave the project. I mean, they will leave the platform to the public, and the crowdsourcing level, I mean, the crowdsourcing steps will come into account, because those who will be using the platform or the tool for the Bayalama, they will they will detect some errors, and they can correct them and supply the corrections to the platform. This is why the level, I mean, the step of working forward for the crowdsourcing is very well talked in the association now. So the partners of the project are ULHB, University of Literature and Human Sciences of Bamako, Amalan, the Malian Academy for Languages, and INALCO in France, which is a national institute in Paris, and many other colleges in the United States of America, and many other partners. So I'm going to stop here, please, and I'm ready for any questions. One more time, I want to thank the organizers of the summit, and it's a very good, idea, very good initiative, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Balo, for a very interesting presentation. I certainly learned a lot. I haven't previously seen examples or case studies of artificial intelligence being used for documenting indigenous languages. Very interesting. And of course, the point that you highlighted about education becoming more accessible through digitalization, I suppose, two sides to the coin about that, as we've seen from the past 20 months of the pandemic. We do have a number of questions in the chat room that are coming up. So first one is directed to our second presenter, Mr. Chinya Makovu, and the question is, what sort of digital regulatory barriers have you encountered or foreseen that have hampered your digital innovation and success so far? Just wondering if we lost our presenter. I unfortunately no longer see him in the group chat, so maybe there was a connectivity issue. Please do feel free to post any other questions in the chat room. We still are doing well on time, and we we do have some time for these questions. Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Yarik, I think we have Isia Cobalo, who can help answer some of the questions that have been posed, by participants and those following us online. I see him on.
Okay, perfect. In fact, I see that one of the questions has been posed in French, so it might be better if you were to read it yourself, because I do not want to butcher it with my pronunciation. I was once told by a taxi driver in Senegal that my French is terrible, so since then I haven't really attempted to speak it.
Question à Monsieur Taouré Chinyamokovi. I think, je pense que Monsieur Isia Cobalo peut répondre à ce. Docteur Isia Cobalo, je m'excuse pour répondre à cette question. Quel est le montant de l'investissement initial qu'exige votre projet de plateforme pour le paiement des services de voyage aérien en ligne? Cette question a été adressée à Monsieur Taouré. Je ne sais pas si Dr Balo peut nous aider à répondre à cette question. Sinon, peut-être il peut répondre à une autre question.
Alors, je crois que pour cette question, pour le cas précis, pour le cas du projet Robot Mali, les financements, les premiers financements, c'était à l'ordre de $3,000. $3,000, c'est ce que les agents du projet m'ont indiqué comme premier financement qu'ils ont eu. Et ces premiers financements ont été issus de la fondation Rockefeller et d'un autre organisme qui s'appelle UNAFON.
OK, perfect. Je crois que cette question a été répondue de Deo Ngenda Kumanu. Je pense bien que le docteur Balo a répondu à votre question. We shall be taking other suggestions, Yarik, if you don't find that problem. Other contributions that are coming in comments, we have from Michael Wamai. He says, Michael Wamai came with a second comment. The first comment was, he talked about the numbers, about internet penetration. He says, we have heard all the numbers about internet penetration, but we have not heard a lot of discussion on content development. Many of the fast movers have generated a lot of content, and that is why there is a lot of concentration in a few countries. This means many of us in Africa are consumers of the digital content generated by the developed countries. How can we help ourselves leverage on content that we don't yet have? That's a question that I open to the panelists. Yarik, you can answer. Dr. Bal.
Yes, perhaps I think that we could give our other panelists a chance to answer. It does seem that we've lost one of them, but perhaps Mr. Ainoui, if you are with us, would you be interested in responding to that question?
I do have a feeling other panelists are not with us. I'm sure just after their presentations, they took their leave, except we'll be waiting for them to rejoin us. But I think Dr. Isia Cobalo and yourself, Yarik, you can help with those answers.
Okay. About the question that the problem that I have encountered.
Hello?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, perhaps Dr. Balo, you could answer that question, and then if you have further comments, Mr. Ainoui, then you could come in and then also supplement them.
Okay. I told during my talk that the problem that we were facing was, first how to, to collect data that are not existent in Bamanankan. For example, people write in Bamanankan, but grammar books and some literature books. But as far as many other books are concerned, we do not have books on chemistry, on biology, on mathematics, and those things are needed really when you need an automatic translator, when you need to create an automatic translator. So this is the first problem that we have been facing. The second problem has been, how to gather people, students, people like students, how they can take into account the artificial intelligence tools, because they were not taught those things in the classrooms. And now once we have gathered them, they needed, special, classes. They needed, special ways to get them into account, to collect and to translate, like the platform needs to have. So those two things are, I think, the most problems that we have been facing in Mali for the project Bailama Baga of Robo Mali. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balo, for that. And Mr. Ainoui, would you like to make any additions to that response?
No, that is fine. That is fine. Thank you.
Okay, then perhaps let me pose one of the other questions that was put in the chat about digital regulatory barriers. You have spoke about some of the regulations during your presentation, so maybe you could share with us, some more practical examples of what you think is working well in regulation of digitalization and technology in Morocco, and areas that could be improved upon, perhaps.
Well, I think one of the most the basics, as was mentioned by several speakers, and is the and yourself, the telecom backbone and the infrastructure. I think back in the end of the 90s, Morocco has embarked in a profound reform of its telecom sector, moving from a monopoly to now 3 telecom operators, so introducing competition and also setting up the institutional framework for regulation, separating the policy making function, and which is by essence a governmental function, and the regulation of the sector, making sure that competition is fair, that entry is respond to norms, disciplining the various stakeholders. So I think that was quite successful, and that on this basis that we've been able to sort of develop and have a dynamics, let's say, digital sector, and it's slowly and gradually penetrating all industries and sector. Where I want to insist, and where this is a current challenge where we need to do better, and that's what we're working on, and particularly is the nexus, the combination, the interactions between academia, R&D, and industries and government and public policies, which is of course also a challenge for advanced economies, by the way. Most of them are sort of questioning their education models and the way we transmit knowledge to new generation. So I think Africa has a fantastic opportunity to, given its that talent generally is and in this area is a sort of it has to be verified, but let's just say it a bit caricaturally, is a decreasing function of age, I guess. You need energy, you need disruption, you need creativity, you need. So I think our education system should also focus on this dimension of what they transmit to students, rather than, let's say, what kind of pure academic knowledge and that we have all studied through. So I think that is a very complex mixture for it to be successful. As you know, Silicon Valley has been one of the success, and been trying to being replicated in many places without necessarily the success, because it takes lots of ingredient and an alchemy that is not, there's no recipe for this kind of thing. So I would encourage countries, to experiment in a way, to be open in their public policy to experimentation. And this is where our institutions, think tanks, could contribute as being spaces and safe spaces and institutions in combination, in between universities and public policy making, with a sort of double specialization, being close to policymakers, understanding the challenges of policy making, because we have associated researchers, fellows, members that are in functions in leading institutions in the private sector, etc., and government and universities. So I think we have, as this is an event for think tanks, I think we have, this is what we're trying to do, us as the policy center. And I think this notion of experimenting, there is there's a mental barrier in public policies that, you know, all public policies needs to be successful in a way. No, they need to experiment. We need to do pilots. We need to accept that public policies can fail. But the way we do public policies through government, to parliaments, to, you know, it's a huge, so it's finding the right space and the institution to do it is, you know, and I think think tanks have a role to play in this sort of very complex ecosystem that needs to be built if we want to foster and make the best of digital technology for our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I think you raised a very pertinent point about necessity for a multi-stakeholder approach between policymakers, academics, technology experts, policy experts when it comes to creating this regulation, because very often all these different stakeholders are operating in vacuum, and you know there's no synergies, and very often policymakers especially are misinformed or ill-informed about the latest developments and tend to politicize these policies, which is also a point that came up during the presentations earlier, that sometimes the government just needs to let the technological innovators be and do their own work. So certainly, hopefully that we are able to share as think tank practitioners some of the best practices and case studies during this event. Once again, thank you for your remarks. We have very few minutes left. Dr. Balo, I'm just wondering if you would like to make any concluding remarks before we wrap up this session?
All right, well, just one question. The decision makers and the other people, in addition, we could add the educators, the teachers, how to teach, you know, those knowledge to students at school, so that they can be aware of many things before going to the practice. So that this is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balo. I think that concludes our session. Right on time, it's 2 minutes until 3. So first of all, thank you very much to our 3 presenters today, Mr. Karim El Ainoui, Executive President of the Policy Center for the New South in Morocco, Mr. Taurai Chinya Makovu, partner and investor in Flowcash Zimbabwe, and Dr. Isia Cobalo from the Université des Lettres in Bamako, Mali. So thank you very much for your contributions. I think we've covered a number of very important topics about infrastructure, telecoms, regulation, education, and the role of multi-stakeholder approach in the governance of technology. And with that, Madam Chair, I hand back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jarek Uriansky. Thank you, your Deputy Program Head of the African Governance and Diplomacy in South Africa. Thank you, together with your panelists, for taking time out to talk to us about what your session had to discuss about. I will continue right ahead. I think we've already had interactions. Normally, we should have been taking questions and suggestions and comments from the public, from the participants and other experts. But I think that has already been handled in your 60 minutes, the time that was accorded to this second session. So thank you for given us an extra 23 minutes that we should have had to get into interactions. Would go straight ahead to the third session. Vincent de Colatangana, est-ce que tu es avec moi sur cette plateforme pour introduire notre troisième session de ce jour?
Bien sûr, Drusilla, je suis là pour cette troisième session du jour, donc dans le cadre de la 8e session du sommet des think tanks d'Afrique 2021. La troisième session du jour est également la dernière au menu ce jeudi, et elle appelle le docteur Thomas Muntali à modérer un échange sur le thème « identifier les politiques adéquates et renforcer les capacités et les compétences essentielles nécessaires à la transformation numérique de l'Afrique. Notre modérateur, Dr Thomas Muntali, est directeur général de la Commission nationale de la planification au Malawi. Bonjour, Dr Thomas Muntali. Bonjour également à votre riche panel.
Right, thank you so much, moderator of the summit. It's quite exciting to be here once again. And I wish to welcome the colleagues that are forming this very important panel. It is quite exciting that we've had to start with the background of where we are coming from in as far as the issues of the status of our digitalization is on the continent, where we had Prof. Nadoze moderating that. And then I think the previous session has looked at some of the initiatives around that. But I think what is now key as well is to now think about the policy landscape. The issue is you cannot talk of initiatives, you cannot talk about how you are going to move forward as a continent if you do not have the right policies in place. And therefore, this panel is going to be very important in dissecting the challenges around the putting in place of the policies around digitalization, so that we can move and advance forward from the behind, where we are behind as far as the continent is concerned. But further to that would be talk about, do we have the capacities to deliver on those policies once they're put in place? And by extension, we're looking at the options that would be there for us to really advance the capacity building on the continent. And so we have a very good mix of the panelists that are going to take us through. A combination of people, panelists that are high-powered from the African Union. We have somebody from a country level think tank in Rwanda. We also are having somebody from the OECD, somebody from the university setup, and indeed the SBF itself, so that when we talk about the policy capacity issues, SBF should be in the wings to be able to say, then how do we help the member countries and the non-state actors to really come up with policies that can deliver on catching up on digitalization in this COVID era. So without wasting much time, I want to first bring to the fore a colleague from Rwanda. I do hope that Ms. Eugenia Kayitesi is here. She is the executive director for IPA Rwanda. That's the Institute of Policy Analysis and Research in Rwanda, a very respected think tank, which is playing a very critical role in Rwanda. And so what she's going to be talking really is based on evidence. It's one of those think tanks that the African Capacity Building Foundation helped to establish. And so you can see the relevance of an institution, which is this capacity building arm of the African Union doing on the continent. Now, Eugenia, from where you sit, we hear about Rwanda as that one of those countries that is really progressing in as far as the digitalization is concerned on the continent. Can you share with the group in terms of the kind of policies that have been put in place and what you still feel remain as the policy challenges? Challenges in terms of implementing the policies around digitalization in Rwanda. Then we can learn from there before we move to the other colleagues. Eugenia? Eugenia, are you?
If I may, I think Eugenia is not with us. I think you may start with the colleagues from the African Union Commission before moving to the fact of peace builders without borders in South Africa. Thank you.
Fine. So I think let's then talk to Dr. Tapiwa Ronald Cheuka, who is the Trade Policy Officer at the African Union Commission. I think the question still remains, in your interface with member countries, do you see, oftentimes, what do you see as issues that seem to be emerging in as far as capacities for putting in place the right policies is concerned, and the capacities for delivering or implementing those digitalization policies is concerned? Let's hear from you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtali. And maybe if I can, just a slight correction. It's actually Mr. I'm not yet a doctor. I'm hoping to reach your level maybe in the next couple of years. But thank you very much. If you can confirm that you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So maybe if I can just take a step back on this issue of digital transformation in Africa and start from a point where I can actually state that we are in an era where there is datafication of economic activity and in the global space, and Africa is not exceptional, or rather is not spared from this datafication of economic activity. And the previous speakers, some stated that policymakers have to play catch up, if I may say that. So I would also want to say, with this datafication of economic activity, we see that the data-driven economy is actually wielding a lot of power in the world. We can actually see that it's actually contributing more than the traditional economy has contributed, and this has to be our main focus. So having realized that there is this datafication of economic activities, the next step is for us to actually see that, to actually ask ourselves, what data policies or data governance policies do we have to put in place, considering that data is actually the foundation of digital transformation. Data is the foundation of the digital economy. So from realizing that, what data governance policies do we need to put in place? We realize that there are quite a number of models out there. If we can look from some of the Asian models where they concentrate on data being of sovereignty and data being of national security, cybersecurity, that is their perspective, and it works for them. And considering, for example, we can take China. China is a huge market, and their policies apply to their kind of market. And we can look from a Western perspective, maybe from a United States perspective, where we realize that it's a free market. They concentrate on preserving, or rather safeguarding, company interests, and the dominance of some of their companies in as far as the digital economy is concerned, it actually leads their policies. So they are more of a free flow of data kind of perspective. And the European model, which is the GDPR, which is used by most of these European countries, is from a perspective where human rights, data is a human right. Data is a fundamental human right. So they protect personal data that much. So having realized these models, the next question will be, what models should Africa institute? What model should Africa institute? We have to find a balanced model which will favor our unique perspective, what our shortfalls in as far as the digital economy is concerned. We don't have that much data value chains which we can actually take pride in at the end of the day. So we need to create these data value chains which will drive the digital economy at the end of the day. So by having realized that we need to take a regional approach to this, because a regional approach is actually a more sensible way to approach these policy issues, because we are coming from a perspective where we need to enhance regional integration in Africa. So when we take a regional approach, for example, in Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, they realize that they have a shortfall in data scientists and data analysts in their digital economy. So they came together, the government, the private sector, as well as the consumers and the CSOs, to actually come up with recommendations where they said that these are the competencies that we need in the region. So by highlighting the recommendations or by having recommendations of competencies in the digital economy, these were passed on to the academia and other institutions, which breed these capacities to say you should have these competencies in mind when you're programming courses or when you're having capacity building initiatives around the continent. So these competencies became the basis of developing capacity within the region. So these are some of the things that we should keep in mind, because the data value chains are the ones that are going to drive the digital economy, and in turn, they're going to drive wealth generation in Africa, as well as being able to, develop as a continent. So I think, in short, this is a summary of the chain that I would want to consider as one that we need to take from data to taking the regional approach, identifying our priorities. What are our priorities at the end of the day? Because we can't just adopt a free flow of data in the economy and think that it will favor us at the end of the day, because our cultural background, our economic history, our social background have to feed into the kind of policies that will come up with that at the end of the day.
Right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtali.
Thanks so much, Tapiwa. So here we are, data policies to feed into the digitalization processes and making sure that we regionally contextualize them. Now, let's get then to the Prof. Prof. Moahi. I hear we have heard from Tapiwa talking about various models that we need to be looking at, even starting from the data that is required for developing the right policies for the continent. Do you have some models, or which do you look as the right kind of policy mixes in as far as digitalization policies is concerned on the continent? And by extension, how do we ensure that we have the right capacities for us to deliver on those policies? From the academia point of view, what do you see as the role that the African academics should be playing in ensuring that we are helping member countries on the continent, including non-state actors, to come up with the right policies and developing the right capacities to implement those particular policies? Prof. Moahi, please, from Botswana Open University.
Right. Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues in the panel, as well as the participants in this think tank summit. And just to express my appreciation for having been invited to come and speak, and coming back to the question that you posed. As an academic, I come from a tradition where a university has in its mission 3 areas of teaching and learning, research and service. All of these 3 areas, I believe, and it is believed increasingly, in order for universities to really participate, not as an ivory tower, but as an institution that involves its communities. We believe in community engagement that cuts across those 3 areas. And likewise, when you look at issues of policies around digitalization, my belief is that there is plenty of room for us to ensure that the voice of the members of the community is heard loud and clear, and that they understand exactly what we are trying to do and where we are coming from and how it fits in with their own needs. Now, traditional policy making as we have it, one would look at it as creating policy for the community rather than developing and designing policy with the community. My mind is cast back to when we first introduced the national ID card here in Botswana. And there was a concerted drive to inform Botswana and educate them as to why we need this national ID. And it was even given a name in Setswana to say this ID will identify who you are, and therefore we call it Umang. Umang is who are you in Setswana. And so this was, it was taken all over. And so by the time they introduced that Umang, people were very much on board. So likewise with digitalization policies, I think we need to do that. We need to first and foremost try to engender an understanding of what digital transformation is amongst our people, first and foremost in our own countries. And ultimately, this will translate into what happens continentally, so that they look at it as not just a technological, we have to look at it, it's not just about technology, but it's also a socio-economic issue. Citizens or members in an organization must understand what that concept is about, and also understand what it means for them in terms of the services that they can get in terms of their everyday issues and so on. And this therefore should translate to an engagement, an active engagement, if you like, with citizens in what digital transformation means and how it will be implemented and what it will mean for them and what their rights would be and what their responsibilities would be and what it is that they need to look out for, issues of cybersecurity and so on. We recognize right now that many African countries have developed policies for digital transformation. Many countries have national ICT policies, but there does seem to be an implementation disconnect. And I liked what the previous speaker in the other panel said, that the way that we develop policy is really what holds us back when it comes to implementation, because the people that we would have been developing the policy for would not even appreciate and understand what it's all about. And so how we develop policy for digital transformation matters. And the Brookfield Institute talks about policy innovation versus traditional policy making. And it goes back to the question that I asked: do we design policy for communities or with communities? And if we design policy with communities, then we enable a better understanding of their needs as individuals and community, and increase the chances of successful implementation. Because and that entails enabling them to participate in even framing the issues or the questions or the problem, providing a contextual lived experience. If you go to your normal agricultural person out there and say, what are your issues you produce? What are the issues that you have with your production? And after production, how do you then market your goods? How do you sell your goods? Is a market out there? Do you know who? Those are the things that bring out what exactly it is that is relevant for your people. And it enables for us to appreciate people's preferences and not just the needs, as would be determined by a study. I go out there and what are your needs and so on and so forth. So, this is what it is. And I also think that digital transformation requires a certain amount of innovation. And innovation then again means you establish, you find out what the needs of the people are. You find out what is that would help them. And on the basis of that, you innovate, rather than innovate and then try to get the community to adopt and use your innovation. I really was quite impressed by what happened during the lockdowns as a result of COVID. I mean, you had lots and lots of apps that were being developed by young people that really came out of the needs at that time. So it's critical that that innovation is tied up with the needs. So that really would be my contribution to this debate, that we need to involve communities. The gentleman going before me talked about a nexus between public policy, academia and research, and private sector. And I would have added the fourth one, that is the role of our citizens, our communities, the people that we exist to serve, not just as academics, but also as policymakers and so on. And of course, once you have that policy in place, there needs to be an action plan. You know, there needs to be something that is developed that will involve everyone. And I can tell you that right now, in my country, we are implementing what is called Smart Bots Botswana, which is a strategy for the digital transformation of Botswana. And it really just involves going out there and engaging the communities and developing the technological infrastructure that is required, and then talking to them about agriculture, health, education, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I would want to end here. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share.
No, thank you so much, Prof. Actually, you are so passionate about the subject. It was very hard to stop you from speaking. You can sell anything on the market and people are going to buy it. Now, I want to move to Madam Elisa Martin from the OECD Development Center. I think the Prof has just pointed out the issue of implementation disconnect. Amongst the other many issues that she's highlighted as very key, including the citizens' participation, to make sure that whatever policies that are put in place are for them, but they're also engaging them to participate fully in the implementation. The implementation issues, where you sit, for example, as OECD, one, how have you seen it working best from the international experience with regard to putting in place policies that would end up to be implemented? And by extension, how do you hope to support capacity building institutions like SCDF on the African continent to help countries to really come up with implementation capacities that would help the digitalization drive moving forward?
Thank you very much, Dr. Muntali. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, we can.
Yes, perfect. So thank you very much. And I would like first to thank the organizers of the summit, the ACDF, for inviting the OECD Development Center and myself to this session on a very timely topic on digital transformation, which has become even more important in the context of the COVID. So on the side of the OECD Development Center, what we provide is a policy platform for all governments to come together and discuss policy practices and good examples that they identified that could be replicated and adapted to specific contexts. So both in Africa, but also Asia or Latin America, for instance. So regarding digital transformation on the African continent, we have produced last year a report in partnership with the African Union Commission on digital transformation for job creation in Africa. So I would like first to take a step back and just have a quick point on the COVID-19, which has, as many speakers told during the previous panels, it has taken a huge toll on African economies. However, what we've seen is that it has also contributed to accelerate digital transformation. So we've seen many different initiatives by governments trying to implement some digital solutions to cope with the effect of the pandemic. So we've seen that in the financial sector with an increase in mobile money transfers and alleviation of different bottlenecks in this sector. Or also in education, African governments try to set up distance learning mechanisms. So many different initiatives that have been implemented to cope with these issues. However, when we take a look at what has been done in terms of implementation of national strategies for job creation, we've seen that most of the strategies have focused only on the ICT sector, so very narrow focus, which is great and will create jobs, but might not be enough to create enough jobs for the 29 million people that are expected to enter the job markets in each year within the next 10 years. So what is needed is to diffuse these new technologies to all economic sectors. So for instance, agriculture, manufacturing, education, health, commerce, etc. However, there are huge challenges, obviously, to doing this. And we've identified three different gaps that would need to be adequately tackled by specific policies. So first, it is the spatial gap. So obviously, one of the most pressing issue is having access to these technologies. And we've identified that prioritizing the development of digital infrastructure, especially in intermediary cities, could yield to high return, as it will host most of the Africa's population in the coming years. And it would not take a lot of investment, because what we've seen is that over half of these cities are located less than 50 kilometers away from the broadband networks. So it would take more investments, but also policies to make these access more affordable to more people. So in most countries, even though some people have access to internet, it remains too costly to maintain this access. So reducing current prices of data services by half would make them affordable for about 75% of the population in most African countries. So that is for the first gap. The second one, and is probably the most important one for the session today, is building the right capacity. So preparing African youth, especially those working in the informal sectors, as they will remain predominant, to embrace the digital transformation. So for instance, we see that a growing number of youth is receiving post-secondary education now. However, when we take a look at surveys that have been run across different countries, we see that a lot of youth, more than half actually, think that their skills are not appropriate for their current employment. So putting in place the right policies, so for instance, increasing on-the-job training or scaling up TVET programs in partnership with the private sector could be a way to better identify the skills needed, but also provide some training to these both formal and informal workers. Another area could be to facilitate the access to fintech solutions, for instance. So on these regulations are still needed to improve the access and provide also capacity building. So for instance, providing some financial literacy courses to this population to improve their access. And these kind of inclusive policies would be very important. Finally, the last gap that we've identified is the competitiveness gap. So what we need is to put in place policies to support Africa's dynamic SMEs and startups that have been growing at very fast pace in the previous years and even now, so they can prosper and actively compete on both on the continent but also outside the continent. So one of the key area of interventions will obviously be through regional cooperation. So for instance, with the implementation of the AFCFTA and the upcoming protocol on e-commerce, it would help obviously tackle the barriers to e-commerce, so facilitate cross-border payments, etc. And also one thing that was mentioned by one of the panelists, harmonizing regulation for cross-border data flows would be very important, but finding the right way to do it will be crucial. So overall, these are the three gaps that have been identified, and many policies are needed, but learning from all countries, different countries' experience is very important. And so the OECD Development Center tried to facilitate this kind of dialogue to identify the best practices. I don't know how I am doing on time. I have no idea, but I'm gonna stop.
Oh, you're okay. You're okay. You've done well, and you should pat yourself at the back. You've kept time very well. Now, having said that, I want to then bring this conversation back to the African Capacity Building Foundation itself. We have Mr. Bakary Kone, who I think strategically the ACBF has decided to have him as one of the panelists here, because the ICBF is supposed to deal with member countries in putting in place the relevant policies, including in this case, policies that talk to digitalization in the wake of COVID-19. And more importantly, to help those countries, being the African Union capacity building arm on capacity development, in terms of building the capacity so that they can deliver on the policies that is put in place. Can you tell us, Mr. Kone, in terms of your state of readiness? Because you've got two key aspects as ACBF. One, you've got the knowledge perhaps none of us can have, looking at supporting all these member countries where you sit in a very advantageous position to be able to say what really are the capacity issues that most countries bring to your attention in as far as the developing right policies is concerned, as well as the capacities that are facing them to implement those policies. And then technically, you also have the ability to support the countries to capacity development plans. I know for sure, like Malawi, we have just come up with a digital economy strategy, but the capacity to implement the strategy still remains a challenge. How ready are you, and what kind of support would you be looking for you to effectively deliver on your mandate as the capacity building arm of the African capacity building, of the African Union on capacity building?
Oh, hi, Thomas. Sorry, would you be kind enough to repeat the question? I just have to rejoin.
All right, no problem. Well, welcome, Bakary. I was just saying that you are the capacity building arm of the African Union, and you are sitting in a very advantageous position in the sense that you have the knowledge of member countries' issues around the kind of policies that they want to put in place. In this case, in as far as digitalization is concerned. But at the same time, you also are privileged to know and to hear from member countries about the implementation capacity issues that they do have. And therefore, how ready are you as the ACBF in supporting member countries to come up with the right policies on digitalization, but at the same time, help them to come up with capacity development plans that can help them to deliver on the policies that they do have. And you also have, here a plethora of academia, think tanks, and partners. What is it that you need from them, including member countries, for you to effectively deliver on that particular mandate?
Thank you very much, Thomas. I see three avenues that can be explored. The first one, as has been said before in this conversation, is to kind of deal with the gap between our education and the development sector. So let's say, for example, digitalization is no longer an option for any of our countries. But if you see, since when we've been discussing digitalization in Africa, let me just remind you, our friends and colleagues in the audience, that that was the theme of the 2019 annual meetings of the World Bank, at least as far as the Africa region is concerned. And I recall it was said at that time that digitalization is the fourth industrial revolution, and that our continent did miss
the first three revolutions. So were we going to take the risk of missing the fourth one? So having said that, as I say, it is important to deal with that gap. Since we discussed in 2019, how have we translated in real policies the fact that we need to train more people in digitalization? How many policies have been taken in our countries to provide incentive for education in digitalization? So I think these are the key questions. It has also been said this morning that digitalization requires a number of elements. That's true. But just like any aspect of development, the first of these elements is people. Making sure that we have the right people, because to digitalize, you need talents, and talents, very unfortunately, don't grow on trees. You have to invest in them, and you have, in your investment, count on your domestic resources first before you go out looking for additional resources. The problem I see in some of our countries is that, yes, we want to digitalize, but at the same time, we're not really making the necessary adjustment that may be required to afford the digitalization sector with the even insufficient domestic resources that we have. So show that it is a priority for you to your financial partners, and chances are that they will come along. I think it has been happening in some countries. I don't want to start listing countries, but it is happening in some countries where there has been a clear direction. There has been, okay, in one word, let's call that leadership. There is a vision for digitalization, and in these countries, the government and those who are making policies have given themselves the tools to bring all forces to converge on making progress on digitalization. I think that is important. I don't want to say it is political will, because political will is served with all kinds of sources, but political will is first and foremost about leadership. So, if you allow me, just want to say that when you have trained your people, and what clearly needs to go with that is to open up to digitalization, to have the right policies that will ensure that our youth, we have a youth bulge in Africa, which very unfortunately in some of our countries we see as a threat. But this is the fantastic opportunity we have for digitalization. Young Africans are creative. If you see what they are doing with machines that are outdated elsewhere, but they are creating. My predecessor was talking about all the apps that were created in Africa during COVID-19. It is impressive. But what are we doing in terms of policies to encourage that? Are we really liberalizing the sector? Unfortunately, we still have countries where internet can just be disconnected for one reason or another. Most of the time, election. We still have many of our countries where access to internet is still a huge problem. So if you want to boost creativity, especially of the youth, you need to deal with those policies. The access to internet should create no threat for our youth. It should create an incentive for them to create. Earlier in the debate, one of our distinguished participants resource people talk about creating content. It is important. Today, young Africans are more users of content than creators of content. But if you want content to be created, you need to provide the necessary incentive for that too. So in summary, what I'm saying is perhaps that let me tell you quickly an anecdote. In 2019, at the annual meeting of the World Bank, the ES did ask me to go and talk to some specialists in digitalization. But these are real gurus. I mean, they know about technology and what is needed, etc. So I sat with these people, and the first thing they told me is, if you want to succeed in your digitalization, get the right policies, train your people. They never said you should, this is how you deal with artificial intelligence or the Internet of Things. No, 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 no. The debate was as simple as that. Because if you start with the Internet of Things, the artificial intelligence and so on, you are starting at the end rather than starting at the beginning. So you need to get the policies right. You need to train your people, and you need a solid planning that you can adjust all the way until you get where you want to go.
I want to pick on where you're talking. You are touching on a very important topic. So I want to come back to the point that from where you sit as ACBF, you've rightly pointed out that policies and then training people is key. How ready are you as the ACBF to support countries in putting together these kind of policies? And if there's
That's a very important question.
And if there's anything that is holding you back, what is it that is really preventing ACBF, which you would want member states or partners to come and support you do what you need to do on the continent?
Thank you for that, Thomas. I believe one of the major assets of ACBF is our partnership with Africa's think tanks. And that is what we are going to use to, I will not say influence now, to help make the right policies in countries. Because that partnership is so strong that out of this 8th annual think tank summit, we have decided under the leadership of the ES, the Executive Secretary, that this time, when we are done, we will collect all the recommendations from this important summit and really work with our partners, the think tank, to develop programs. We may not have all the resources to fund them, and that is the reason why we need to work with the think tanks, develop programs that we can sell, not only to our government, but also to our partners. Because everyone understands that policies are critical if we want a good digitalization into the future. But how do we get the right policies, as the ES was saying in his very first word of introduction, if our think tanks are still struggling to get to the continent's priorities, where some of them have to literally be commissioned for studies that are diverting them from the realities of some of the countries. So that is something we need to resolve one way or another. But again, because we're talking about African institutions, our first course of action will be to get African institutions, and when I say institutions here, it is at the largest of the senses. It is private, it is civil society, it is government, to get our think tank funded at the right level. Because competencies are there, because we have partnered with them for many years, and we know they can take up, they can take on this request for good policies for digitalization. Some are already doing that, actually, I can tell you. Again, I said I would not list anyone today, but they will recognize themselves. There's a country I visited recently where everything, almost everything, I can tell you, is digitalized. You know, I sit home, I request my passport online, and 1 week later I have it. I'm sorry to say, that is not happening yet in my country. But we need to see that happening because that is not the most difficult thing to do. So it has more to do with policies than the financial means to do it.
Great. Bakari well responded to, and I think one can easily see the state of readiness that SBF has, because sometimes we think it's just SBF, but I think clearly you've got tentacles of think tanks that can support you in this journey. I would want to just come back to the platform with a few issues that are emerging. There is the Adeyinka Adeyemi, who is saying, in pushing for digital policies, governments should emphasize growth and not necessarily seeing a new space for taxes, which invariably drives away business. We all lose. Government loses the opportunity to expand its tax base, and innovators give up under the weight of tax. A very important contribution. And there's another one from Thompson Mutama, who says, I want to pose a question to Ms. Elisa St. Martin. Digitalization is an expensive process that in most cases is driven by the governments. Is there a way of making the processes cheaper? How can civil society organizations and other non-state actors acquire essential skills to drive or take leadership in the digitalization process? So I think I'll be asking Madam Martin to come back on that, but there are also a few other comments which I found interesting. One, of course, Maiwawo Polipoli just asked, what comes first? Is it policy or implementation or capacity building? But I think, as Bakari has clearly explained, I think we need to have the policies in place and then have the proper implementation capacity building programs to support implementation of those policies. And Jawan Singh says digital literacy would need to be combined with business and entrepreneurial skills. Again, Adeyinka Adeyemi says Bakari is correct about investment in training and digitalization, but we need to develop appropriate curriculum to unlearn, de-learn, and then teach the tools. The youth have simply learned the wrong lessons and are using them effectively. The wrong lessons, but using them effectively. Interesting. And then the last one that I want to read, a bit long, but I think important, is saying, so let's call digitalization gap between Africa and the rest of the world should be the major issue today. First, education must be reformed across the continent and deal with the reality of our continent. Second, each African country by itself cannot create digitalization. This must be a continental agenda. So I'm sure that our colleagues in the African Union and the SCBF should be listening more. But before we need to build an African federal state to unite the continent with infrastructure, including digitalization, agriculture, and road, we should look also at the private sector, which is a good thing. But history shows us a strong national public service on the whole of the continent is the starting point. Otherwise, we just follow what the international institutions urge us to do. This is not the way to start. The right policy starts with education based on the African values and traditions. Innovation is based on tradition. Thank you all. So basically, there is the uniformity in terms of what needs to happen. Right policies that are contextualized to the African continent, including the educational systems that talk to those policies directly, and then the capacities required to build on the implementation of those policies. Now, having said this, I would want to see if there's if Madam Martin, you can come to respond to that question that I had asked. But finally, I'll also ask the panelists to just chip in with their 1 minute concluding remarks, and then finally I will hand back the mantle to the session summit moderator. Madam Martin, first to you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please.
Apologies. Yes, with your permission, I think in the program we have Dr. Charles Yukonge, who is the second in the list of speakers. I think he's been left out.
Oh, is that so?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so who have we left out?
Dr. Charles Yukonge, who is the founder and director of Peace Builders Without Frontier.
Oh, okay. I think on my list I didn't have that name, so it's fine. Dr. Likongo, if you can come in, but perhaps before you do, can you allow Madam Elisa Martin to just quickly respond to the issue that has been raised?
No problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be very quick. And thank you for your question. It's a very interesting one. I think on this, I would like to take the example of the development of mobile money in Africa. This trend, actually, Africa has been the leader in mobile money adoption up until very recently. And this trend has been led not by government, but more by innovative startups that have began to propose this kind of technologies and this kind of solution to fill a gap, so enable more people to have access to financial means. And I think the role of governments here is to support these innovators. So I take the example of financial inclusion and mobile money, because I have the example in mind of Ghana, who at the beginning, before 2014, had set up some regulation of mobile money providers that were too restrictive for them to enable them to reach more people. So after they reformed their regulation, we've seen the adoption of these kind of mobile money solutions actually skyrocket. So it's a matter of providing the right policies to support these kind of innovations that are not necessarily present in other continents. So it's also up to the government to have discussions with the private sector, improving the dialogue with the private sector to identify the policies that are needed. So in different areas on regulations, but also, for instance, on the skills that are needed to develop their different innovations. So I will stop there to leave the floor to the other panelists. But thank you very much for the question.
Right. No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elisa, for that. And let's get back to Dr. Charles Nyukogwe. My apologies once again. Next time we'll have to come up with an app that recognizes people that may have been left out, even if somebody is not seeing them.
We want to precise, Dr. Thomas Montali, that Dr. Charles Nyukongwe is the founder and director of Peace Builders Without Borders in South Africa, just so we know from where he's coming from. And
thank you so much. Very useful. Please come
in. He's also Cameroonian.
All right.
Also Cameroonian.
Yes. Yes.
Vous êtes le bienvenu, Dr. Charles Nyukongwe, sur cette panel.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Good to see you again, Tom. I'm sure that you don't remember me, but it's okay. From CABDEF. I used to do some stuff with CABDEF just before you left SCBS.
Oh, no, that is in the face. I recognize you. My apologies.
Just so that I don't derail the conversation and the excellent presentation or sharing which you're doing. Mine is just going to be a brief comment, and maybe Bakari can speak to it. My sense is that one of the inhibitors of digitalization is the political systems which we have in Cameroon or in Africa, or the political culture. And I try to view this political culture in this kind of scenario. Firstly, all or most African states have a national development plan. Some have developed it with the assistance of the ACBF. Others have the ACBF even a system to assess the capacity needs of their respective countries. However, I think that Prof mentioned earlier on that perhaps a conversation needs to be had about how do we get to develop these policies, or how do we even get to come up with these development priorities. My sense is that largely the development priorities of the different African countries, particularly, and you'll excuse me for that, particularly the French-speaking African countries, the national development plans are sometimes not even different from political party memoranda, to the extent that if you even have to look at just the voting lines or the adoptions of the national development plans, even in the parliaments, the adoption is largely around party lines, which begs the question, if it is largely around party lines, how can you therefore have an inclusive or long-term system which can even sustain policies such as digitalization? That's the first. The second for me is the fact that digitalization, as it were, however how many successes which we mentioned on the continent and the usage by the youth to innovate and to make things simpler for them, I think that what we are also perhaps not applying our minds to is the fact that youths use the opportunities which we have for digitalization largely for entertainment purposes, because the process of streamlining the national development plans and the national priorities to becoming issues driven by citizens is largely missing. And I want to bring, for instance, the example of Comoros, because I'm sure that there's no Comorian inside of it. Comoros has as part of its development plan to bolster its oil drilling capacity. They also realize that whilst that capacity may exist in the country, that capacity is in different spheres. But the people who perhaps have that capacity, some of them are out of the country and they don't realize that the country really needs them. So how does government actually translate its development priorities into an opportunity that its citizens can actually tap from? I think for me, that's one of the challenges that continues to bedevil the continent, and however many good policies and intentions that the governments may have, not being able to actually drive it from top to bottom, although policies should actually start from bottom up, not being able to get some kind of inclusive or national buy-in leaves the national development priorities really hanging, of which the national development priorities could benefit tremendously from the technical know-how, which in large parts resists or rests on the continent. I'll leave it at that, Tom.
Thank you so much, Doc, for being very precise and to the point in terms of the issues that you've raised. I would want at this particular stage to really give the colleagues a minute each in case, and I'm not going to go by order of the panelists, but in case you think there's some very important point you want to drive home before you leave the discussion. Any of the panelists that wants to come in, most welcome. A minute.
Era, if I may
yes.
speak on the issue of our curriculum and what we train our people for. I recently, I don't know, I saw a clip on social media that showed an exam that was administered in some Western country talking about coding and the economy of that country. And, oh, okay, my video. And also an example of an exam in an African country asking the student to name the two children of, I don't know, the queen of where, I can't even recall. So, you know, that's the kind of, those are the kinds of issues that we're dealing with. To what extent have we looked at our education system and said, okay, this system, the entire education system prepares us for the fourth industrial revolution, prepares us for the new skills, for the skills that we can't even imagine in time. Our youth to the labor space, either, you know, as employees or as entrepreneurs, they already are geared towards developing economies that are based on digitalization, because digitalization, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's necessary. It's not a luxury. It's not something that, you know, we would be told long ago that you do once you've satisfied your basic needs. It's what you do with your basic needs using digitization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Unless somebody has also a burning issue before I close off and pass the mic back to the summit moderator. Right, I think basically this has been a very exciting panel, and we've just hit it right within time, just to highlight for the sake of our colleagues that are taking notes here that some of the key issues, I'm not going to summarize everything, really to do about the datafication issues, to do making sure that we engender the digitalization issues by making sure that we also bring on board the citizens. And the issues of implementation disconnect have to be considered strongly. And we should expand this, not to just look at ICT sector. Digitalization should expand beyond that, and access, especially on the internet, will promote this in all countries in Africa, including those in the formal sector, including making sure that there's competitiveness across the African continent so that we can compete with the other regions, including harmonizing our regulations. Education remains very key, including what we are teaching our youth, so that we go in the direction of digitalization, and that the policies are a very important component, that we train our people around the policies that we've developed. We are excited that ACBF is already ready to partner with the think tanks to be able to deliver and support countries in meeting the agenda of having the right policies in place and the capacity building programs to support implementation. Thank you so much, and we want to sincerely thank ACBF for giving us this opportunity. We wish you well as you gear yourself to helping member countries do the right things around the policies. Back to you, Madam Moderator. Bye.
Thank you so very much, Doctor, for using this 1 hour plus to moderate and answer questions and take comments from the public, from the different experts and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the third and last session of the first day of the 2021 Africa Think Tank Summit on Digital Transformation. We have had 3 sessions after our opening session. The first session, moderated by the Executive Secretary of the ACBF, with 5 speakers sought to understand digital transformation, its state implications and potential for building back Africa better. Second session, moderated by Mr. Yarik Turiansky, Deputy Program Head, African Governance and Diplomacy, South Africa, looked closely at initiatives to foster digital transformation in Africa and ways of sharing experiences at continental, regional, and national levels. Our third and last session of the day that has just concluded, it was moderated by Dr. Thomas Muntali, and who is the Director General at the National Planning Commission, Malawi. It identified the right policies and building capacities as critical skills needed for digital transformation in Africa. And that's a little summary of the 3 sessions and the opening session that we had this morning. Vincent Dopola Tangana, you have a preview of day 2 tomorrow before we end today's discussions. Vincent?
L'agenda de demain, donc, 10 décembre 2021, session 4 dès 11h, heure de Harare, qui se trouve à GMT2. Ce sera sous le thème Transformation numérique et santé publique, recherche récente sur les enjeux de la lutte anti-tabac en Afrique. Modérateur, Dr Barassou Diawara, expert principal en gestion des connaissances ACBF. Suivra la session 5 autour du thème rôle des think tanks dans la promotion de la transformation numérique en Afrique et l'amélioration de leur viabilité. Modérateur, Monsieur Desmond Mouchi, Economic and Public Policy Expert, ISRF. La session 6 aura pour thème établir les partenariats et mécanismes de coordination pour soutenir la transformation numérique en Afrique. Modérateur, Dr. Christiane Abou-Lehaf, Senior Manager, Coopération internationale, Afrexim Bank. Nous aurons aussi une session consacrée aux jeunes think tankers. Elle sera modérée par Madame Andrea Baerti, coordinatrice en think tank. Ce n'est qu'après que nous aurons la cérémonie de clôture de cette 8e session du sommet des think tanks d'Afrique 2021.
Thank you, Vincent de Paul Atangana. Like you just enumerated, the 3 sessions that we'll be having tomorrow, plus the session, the one that will be handled by the young think tankers before the closing session, where we would have a final communique containing key messages and our closing remarks. We ask you all to continue, keep bringing your suggestions, your questions, whatever contributions you may have, your preoccupations. The ACBF's email is open to receive that. It is roots@acbf-pact.org, roots@acbf-pact.org. Here we would go through those emails and of course get our experts to elucidate on them tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, it will be our pleasure to welcome you back here tomorrow for tangible solutions to build Africa's digital transformation drive post-COVID-19. Have a blessed afternoon, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Bye.